He woke up in a stranger's body on the cold floor. 3 steps away lay a dead man with his own face, the same scars on his palms. And the first word that popped into the former real estate lawyer's head wasn't help, but deed. Daniel So opens his eyes and sees a carved ceiling with a crack running across the entire slab. The air reeks of blood and wet plaster. He sits up and pain shoots through his body. It's not his body. His arms are thinner, the fingers are longer, scars on the palms he never had. He turns his head. 3 steps away lies a young man his age in a silk shirt stained brown with blood. Dead eyes stare at the ceiling. The scars on the dead man's palms mirror his own. It is his face, the face of the one in whose body he now inhabits. Strangers' images flash through his mind. A father with a gray beard guards the gate against men in black cloaks. A mother blocks the door with her body. A girl of about 14 is dragged by the hand across the courtyard toward a cart. A silver scroll against a backdrop of scales glitters on the breastplates. A blow. Darkness. Daniel clenches his teeth. In his past life, he spent 10 years tearing up forged documents in the courts of Seoul. He knew the land code by heart. With a single glance at a map, he could tell where the real border was and where the forgery began. And now he stands in a stranger's body, in a strange world, thinking only one thing. If the house was taken away, that means there was a document. If there was a document, that means it can be verified. If it can be checked, then it can be challenged. He drops to one knee and closes the dead man's eyes. I don't know who you were, but I'm in your house, and I won't let them take it away. He stands up and surveys the room. Professional habit kicks in before thought. The walls, the foundation, the floors. He runs his hand over the stonework, and his fingers catch on the carvings. Fine. Old. The pattern repeats every 20 centimeters. Not decoration. Function. Lines run across the floor from the walls toward the center and converge exactly where he woke up. He places his palm on the central stone and, out of habit, utters the words he used to say to every client. This is my land. The floor shudders. Not an earthquake, something else. As if a huge beast had stirred beneath the foundation and opened one eye. Heat radiates from the stone up his arm into his chest. The lines flash white and fade. And Daniel hears it, not with his ears. The earth beneath him sighs, like a man who hasn't breathed for 300 years and has finally taken his first breath. He pulls his hand away and collapses to the floor. His heart is pounding, his palm is burning, and he knows for certain that the wall on the right stands on the property line, while the wall on the left extends half a meter beyond it. He feels the boundary with the soles of his feet. It runs along the outer walls, the courtyard up to the gate, and ends at the old well, half a hectare. And inside it, every stone, every plank is now his. Not on paper, by something older than any paper. Daniel does what he always does when he doesn't understand what's happening. He works. He finds a broken stool. He sits down. He grabs a charcoal pencil and a scrap of cloth, and he makes an inventory. The hall. Devastation. One body. Burial required. His hands stop shaking. He walks through the entire house in an hour. 12 rooms. The basement, the attic, the courtyard with the well. He touches every wall with his palm, and the earth responds. Here the wall is solid. Here the crack goes deep. Here there is a void under the floor. Here in the wall is a niche bricked up. He carries the dead man into the courtyard. The body is light. Too light. They starved him to death. Someone else's memory suggests a name. So Jin Ho, the eldest son, the heir. Daniel buries him in the garden under the largest dead tree and digs with his hands because there is no shovel. The earth gives way easily. Too easily. It helps. He straightens up, and a branch of the dead peach tree sways quietly without any wind. The tree remembers how it bloomed. It waits. Now is not the time. First, the sales contract. Daniel bursts into the ransacked office on the second floor. Papers are all over the floor. The cabinet has been broken into. Someone was looking for documents and thought they'd found them. Daniel closes his eyes. Earth, show me. The warmth in the soles of his feet shifts to the left toward a niche bricked up. He presses his palm against it, and the bricks fall out on their own. Inside is a scroll tied with a blue cord and sealed with wax. 3 impressions, each pointing toward the east. The So clan's ancestral charter. Boundaries, boundary markers, the names of the heirs. His father's signature in red and a date from 12 years ago. He has the original, which means any deed presented must refer to this document, and a single discrepancy will turn it into trash. He goes down to the hall. He places the charter on the table and waits. He knows they'll come. When a house is being taken over and the owner hasn't fled, they always come to check. The night, the earth, won't let him sleep. It hums beneath him insistently, like an old cat that has finally waited for its master. It tells him, there used to be a cupboard with jam here. They used to store wine in oak barrels here. And right here, 300 years ago, someone also laid their hand on the stone and said the same words, and left. The earth remembers this like a wound. They arrive an hour after dawn. 6 guards bearing the silver scroll crest, and a bailiff in a blue cloak carrying a briefcase, the one who evicts. The bailiff looks at the boy at the table and smirks. You're alive. That's easy to fix. Pack your things and get out. Daniel doesn't get up. He utters a single word. Deed. Show me the document on which you claim the house. The bailiff throws the scroll on the table. Daniel unfolds it and reads for 30 seconds. He looks at the seal at the bottom. 1 impression, facing west. Then he looks at the family charter next to it. 3 impressions, facing east. The So clan seal is stamped 3 times, facing east. His voice is even. You have 1, facing west. This isn't a deed. It's a napkin. The bailiff stops smiling. Throw him out. The nearest guard raises his baton, and his hand freezes halfway up, as if the air around it has thickened. It twitches. It tries again. The hand does not move. Its feet stand on ground that hears its master. Daniel does not raise his voice. Leave my house. The door behind you will open on its own. The door swings open, without wind, without a hand. The 6 exchange glances and leave. They don't run. Their legs carry them toward the exit gently and unstoppably, like the current of a river. They don't understand what's happening and can't resist. The bailiff remains last, his face pale. Daniel hands him a pencil. Write a receipt, that the paper shows signs of forgery, that you will forward the materials to the court. The bailiff looks at the open door. He looks at the floor beneath his feet and writes with a trembling hand. Daniel takes the receipt. You are free. The door closes on its own. By noon, people in the lower town are already whispering that at the estate someone has woken up, that the bailiff was carried out on his own 2 feet, that the door opened on its own. The old bookseller in the shop on the corner hears this and, for the first time in years, sets down his quill. He takes off his glasses, wipes them, puts them back on, and says very quietly, "It can't be." Daniel spent his first full day at the estate just as he had spent his first day at any site in his past life, with a survey. He started at the gate and walked clockwise along the property line. The ground told him where it ran, exactly 3 steps from the outer fence. He could feel it with the soles of his feet, a precise line, neither to the right nor to the left. He walked and counted his steps. The perimeter took 412 steps. With a stride length of about 70 centimeters, that came to about 290 meters, half a hectare, maybe a little less. He jotted it down on a new scrap of cloth. The fence had been knocked down in 3 places. The gate was hanging by a single hinge. Daniel walked up to the gate and placed his hand on it. The metal was cold and rusty. The ground gave him a clue. The bottom hinge. The pin was bent. If he straightened it out and oiled it, the gate would last another 10 years. He found in the stable a piece of iron rod and a hammer with a cracked handle. It took an hour and a half to straighten the pin and hang the gate back in place. When he finished and the gate stood level, the ground beneath his feet hummed quietly. Approval, not a word. A sensation, as if someone very large and very old had nodded. Daniel wiped his hands on his shirt and moved on. The kitchen was next. The stove was intact. The chimney wasn't blocked. In the pantry, he found some flour left in a sealed jar. The mice hadn't gotten to it. The jar stood in a niche that the earth apparently protected. Next to it stood a jug of oil, thickened but usable, a sack of dried beans, a bundle of dried herbs under the ceiling. Daniel made an inventory. Food supplies, about 3 kilograms of flour, half a liter of vegetable oil, dried beans, herbs, type unknown, enough for 2 days if he rationed it. He lit the stove, found a pot, cooked the beans with the herbs. The food turned out bland but hot. He ate sitting on the kitchen threshold and looked out into the yard. Dead peach trees stood as bare skeletons against the gray sky. The well was in the center of the yard, a stone structure, a bucket on a chain. The water was clear. Daniel remembered, as if it were yesterday, how the earth had given him water without effort. He walked over the well and peered down. Darkness, the smell of fresh water, and something else, as if someone were sleeping at the bottom of the well. Daniel took a step back. Then he leaned in again. He asked aloud, "Who are you?" Silence. Then the answer came to the soles of his feet. Not a word. An image. Something small and round and very old sits at the bottom of the well and watches over the water. The spirit of the well. A stranger's memory suggested this concept. Small spirits bound to specific places. Wells, rapids, hearth places. They are not intelligent in the human sense. They simply exist. And they serve the territory if the master acknowledges them. Daniel stood there for a minute. Then he took his list on a scrap of cloth out of his pocket. He turned it over and wrote on the back, a contract between the master of the territory, Daniel So, and the spirit of the well. Clause 1. The spirit ensures a steady supply of clean water. Clause 2. The master agrees not to throw trash into the well and to clean the well once a season. Clause 3. Valid indefinitely. Landlord's signature. He signed with a charcoal pencil. Then he placed the scrap of cloth on the edge of the well. For a second, nothing happened. Then the cloth slipped down into the darkness. Silently, Daniel waited. A column of cold air rose from the well, and the water in the bucket became even clearer. He took that as a signature. He spent the rest of the morning in the cellar. The cellar was large, 6 by 8 meters. The ceiling was low. The shelves along the walls were empty. On the floor lay shards of barrels. A wine cellar. Once, 20 white oak barrels had stood here. The earth remembered each one. Daniel placed his palm on the cellar wall and closed his eyes. The earth remembered the wine. Thick, dark, with a hint of cherry and oak. It remembered, year after year, how the barrels were filled and emptied. It remembered the cooper's hands as he hammered the staves together. It remembered the laughter in this cellar. Daniel removed his hand. It was too soon. He didn't yet understand how it worked. The earth could reproduce what it remembered, but at what cost? And under what conditions? He needed information, he needed books, and he needed people. He left the cellar and stopped in the courtyard. It was noon. The sun had broken through the clouds. In the daylight, the estate looked sad, but not hopeless. The roof was intact, the walls were standing, the foundation was solid. The main problem: he was alone. One person cannot restore the estate. One person cannot defend the territory. One person cannot find his sister. Yuna. The name came from someone else's memory. So, Yuna, 16 years old, skinny, dark hair down to her shoulders, a mole under her left eye. They took her away on the night of the pogrom. Men in black cloaks. The wagon drove off to the east. That was all he knew. Daniel sat on the edge of the well and clenched his fists. In his past life, he would have found her within a day. A police report, surveillance cameras, databases. Here, he had nothing but an empty house and the earth that heard his voice. He sat there like that for about 10 minutes. Then he heard footsteps outside the gate. The ground told him before his ears did. 2 people. One was old. His step was heavy and uneven. A cane. The second was light. A child or a teenager. No weapons. Intentions unclear, but not hostile. Daniel stood up and walked to the gate. He opened it. Standing outside the gate were the old man with the cane and a girl of about 12. The old man was tall, thin, and stooped. His face was deeply wrinkled. His eyes were sharp. He was wearing the gray clothes of a servant, faded but clean. The girl was holding his hand, thin, big eyes, a rag bag on her shoulder. The old man looked at Daniel. He was silent. Daniel looked at him. A stranger's memory stirred. Slowly, like a fish at the bottom of a muddy river. The manager, Kim. The man who had run the So clan's affairs for 30 years, who knew every room in this house, who had slipped away into the night of the pogrom because he had been ordered to save his granddaughter. Kim stood and looked at Daniel, at Jinho's face, which was now worn by another man, and he saw something was wrong. Daniel understood this from the way the old man's eyes flinched. "You are Manager Kim." The old man nodded. "Come in." They entered. The girl looked around. Kim looked only at Daniel. They sat down at the table in the main hall. Daniel set a pot with leftover beans and 2 bowls he'd found in the kitchen in front of them. Kim didn't eat. He just watched. Then he spoke. "You're not Jin-ho." His voice was quiet and steady. Daniel didn't lie. He paused for a second and replied, "No." Kim nodded. His expression didn't change, as if he'd been expecting that answer. "Where is he?" Daniel paused for another second. Then he answered, "In the garden, under the peach tree." Kim closed his eyes. The girl stopped eating. She looked at her grandfather and quietly put down her spoon. A minute passed in silence. Then Kim opened his eyes. They were dry. "Who are you?" Daniel thought about how to explain. Then he decided that the truth would be easier than any lie. "I'm a man from another world. I woke up in this body yesterday morning. I don't know your language except for what this body remembers. I don't know your laws. I don't know who rules this city. But I know one thing. This house has accepted me, and I won't give it up." Kim looked at him for a long time. Then he looked at the table, at the family charter lying next to the pot, at the bailiff's receipt, at Daniel's list on the scrap of cloth. Then he shifted his gaze to the door that had opened on its own that morning. Recognized. Kim spoke the word as if tasting it. Bonds. I thought they were fairy tales. Not fairy tales. Kim paused. Then he looked at his granddaughter. The girl was eating beans. The old man turned to Daniel. "I'm 62 years old. I've run this house for 30 years. I watched Jin-ho grow up. I watched his mother die. I watched them take Yuna away. I left because I was ordered to save Miri." He nodded toward the girl. "Miri, the manager's granddaughter, 12 years old. The girl looked up from her bowl. She looked at Daniel. Her gaze was serious and mature, beyond her years. Daniel nodded at her. Kim continued, "If the house has accepted you, then that is the land's decision. I don't understand how it works, but I understand one thing. I have nowhere to go. She has a place to go. And if you said you won't give up the house, that means we need a master, and you need a steward." Daniel looked at the old man. Then he took out his list, turned it over, found a blank corner, wrote, "Kim, steward, Miri, under guardianship." Then he looked at Kim. "I need to know everything. The clan's history, the city's laws, the judges' names, the names of the people of the Silver Scroll, and everything you know about where they took Yuna." For the first time during the entire conversation, Kim straightened his shoulders slightly. He had been given a task. He understood tasks. They talked until evening. Kim spoke and Daniel took notes. The So clan had owned land in the eastern part of the city for 400 years. Jinho's father was the last clan head. 3 months ago, the Silver Scroll presented a promissory note in the name of the late grandfather. The note was forged. Everyone knew it, but no one could prove it because the notary who had certified the note was a man of the guild. Based on the note, a writ of seizure was issued. Jinho's father refused to sign a voluntary transfer. A week later, he was found dead in his own office. The official cause, cardiac arrest. Daniel listened, and a feeling welled up inside him, one he knew well from his past life. The cold anger of a lawyer who sees the system being used to destroy people. Not hot, not blind, precise and patient. He jotted down the facts, names, dates, amounts, procedural steps. And with every line, he saw the pattern more clearly. The Silver Scroll operated by a template. A fake debt, a bribed notary, pressure on the family. If the unfortunate victim doesn't sign voluntarily, case. Then registration under a front person. The same scheme over and over again. And that means it has a weak spot. Any scheme built on forgeries is vulnerable in one place, in the originals. If you gather all the original documents of every clan and every family they've robbed and cross-check them with what the guild presented, the whole structure will collapse. Daniel looked at the family charter. He was the first to have kept the original, but perhaps not the only one. That evening, he stood in the courtyard. Kim had put Miri to bed in one of the back rooms. The girl had fallen asleep instantly. Her first night under a roof in a week. Kim came out to Daniel. They stood side by side, looking at the dead garden. "You really are from another world." "Yes." "They take homes there, too." "Yes." "And you fought against it. 10 years." Kim was silent. Then he said quietly, "It's a good world that sent you to us." Daniel didn't answer. He looked at the peach trees and thought of Yuna, of the girl he had never known but whose name he bore as a duty. The earth beneath his feet hummed softly. It was waiting. He placed his palm on the trunk of the nearest tree. The embers inside the dead wood were still warm. He didn't know how to do it, but the earth knew. He closed his eyes and thought. Grow. In the morning, Miri ran out into the yard and stopped. The old peach tree above Jinho's grave was in bloom, white and pink petals on branches that had been bare and dry just yesterday. And on one lower branch hung a ripe fruit. Just one. Golden. Miri stood and watched. Then she looked up at Daniel, who was standing in the doorway. Daniel smiled. It was the first and last smile he allowed himself that day. There was too much work ahead. The third day began with a knock at the gate. The ground had warned her earlier. One person, a man, heavy, breathing uneven, blood. Something wet and hot on his left side. A weapon, a sword at his belt. But his hand wasn't on the hilt. Intention, not aggression, desperation. Daniel opened the gate. Standing on the threshold was a man in his 30s, wearing the tattered uniform of a guard. The vest, once white, was caked with mud and blood. His left side was bandaged with a rag. The rag was soaked through. His face was gray from blood loss. His eyes were cloudy but alive. The man looked at Daniel, then at the gate, then at the house behind him, and uttered a single word. Please. The foreign memory was silent. Jinho didn't know this man, but the vest was familiar. White, with a blue stripe. The So clan's personal guard, one of those who had been on duty the night of the pogrom and survived. Come in. The man stepped over the threshold, and the very second his foot touched the ground, Daniel sensed everything. 3 broken ribs, a deep cut on his left side, but not deep enough to damage internal organs, a laceration on his right forearm, a dislocated left shoulder, set crookedly. The man had been walking with these injuries for at least a day. He shouldn't have been standing on his feet. Daniel took him by the arm and led him toward the house. Kim peeked out the door. He saw the wounded man. The old man's face changed. Tae-sun. Kim knew him. Tae-sun, a former fencer, 29 years old, Jinho's personal bodyguard since he was 16. Kim had talked about him yesterday. On the night of the pogrom, Tae-sun had been fighting at the gate and had been struck in the side with a spear. He fell. They thought he was dead and didn't finish him off. Daniel laid him down in a room on the first floor. Kim brought water and a clean cloth. Miri stood in the doorway, eyes wide. Daniel bandaged the wound. His hands moved with confidence, not because he was a doctor, because the earth was guiding him. Press here, release here. This herb from the bundle in the kitchen. Crush it, apply it. And he could feel the territory was working. Slowly but surely, the wound under the bandage began to close. Not instantly, but faster than possible. Tae-sun lost consciousness a minute after he lay down. Daniel sat nearby and thought, a third person on his territory. The boundaries had expanded when Kim and Miri arrived. The garden and the stable had become part of the plot. Now, with Tae-sun's arrival, he felt the earth stretching again. A few more meters beyond the fence. A stretch of the alley behind the eastern wall. One person, one expanded boundary. The rule worked. But not just because of the presence. Daniel listened to the sensation. No, Tae-sun had crossed the threshold himself. He had asked. He had been given shelter. It was a choice. On both sides. Not restraint, not capture, recognition. Daniel stood up. He went out into the courtyard. Kim was standing by the well, looking up at the sky. He needs a doctor, Daniel said it matter-of-factly. The earth helps, but it isn't a healer. 3 broken ribs and a wound in his side. He needs a real doctor. Kim shook his head. All the city's healers work under the guild's license. If anyone finds out we're treating a former clan guard, they'll come after us. Daniel was silent. Is there anyone outside the guild? Kim thought, for a long time. Then he said, yes, the daughter of a branch of the Pak family, a healer. She works at the market as an herbalist. No license, but her hands are better than any guild butcher's. Where? The lower market, 2nd row from the fountain. Daniel looked at the gate. Beyond the gate lay the territory where he was an ordinary man. No bonds, no protection. Any mercenary could drive a knife between his ribs and it would be over. He stood there for a second. Then he walked toward the gate. Kim called out to him, "You can't go out!" "I know." He knew, and he went out. The city greeted him with noise and smells. The street behind the estate was narrow. The houses stood close together, walls of yellow stone, tiled roofs. People went about their business. Merchants pushed carts. Children ran somewhere, shouting. An ordinary day in an ordinary city. Daniel walked quickly, keeping close to the walls. Without the bonds, he felt naked. Every step echoed with emptiness in the soles of his feet. No response, no whisper, just stone and dirt. He found the lower market in 20 minutes. Kim had explained the way precisely. The old man knew the city like the back of his hand. The market was noisy and dirty. Rows of stalls under awnings, meat, fish, vegetables, fabrics, clay pottery. The second row from the fountain, the herbalist. He found her by the scent. The stall smelled of mint and wormwood and something bitter he didn't know the name of. Behind the counter sat a young woman of about 24. Her dark hair was tied back in a bun. Her hands were stained green from the herbs. Her face was calm. Her eyes were attentive. She was sorting through dried roots and arranging them in small clay pots. Her movements were precise and economical, every root in its place. Daniel approached. Park Ha-yun. The woman looked up. Who's asking? So, Daniel, head of the So clan. Ha-yun's expression didn't change. The So clan has been destroyed. She said it flatly, without malice, like a fact. Not destroyed. The house is still standing. The master is alive. I need a doctor. Ha-yun looked at him for a long time, appraisingly, like a cat deciding whether to pay attention to a new person in the room. I don't have a license. I don't need a license. I need hands that know how to heal. 3 broken ribs and a deep cut on the side, about 2 days old. Haeyeon narrowed her eyes. Who's injured? Taesun, a former clan bodyguard. Something flashed in her eyes, quickly, almost imperceptibly. But Daniel had picked up on things like that back in his previous life. During witness interrogations, during negotiations with shady real estate agents. A micro-expression. She knew that name. Or she knew that man. Haeyeon stood up. She began packing her bag. Herbs, bandages, a clay flask containing something dark, needles, thread. She worked in silence. 3 minutes later, the bag was packed. She covered the counter with a mat and turned to him. Lead the way. They walked back in silence. Haeyeon asked no questions. Daniel didn't explain. He counted the minutes. Every minute outside the territory was a minute of vulnerability. He noticed he'd looked back twice, and he noticed that Haeyeon had noticed. When they entered the gate, Daniel felt the bonds cover his shoulders. Warmth, safety, and information. Haeyeon, 24 years old, unarmed, intention to help, a lie. No lies, not a single false note. She came to heal. Period. Haeyeon examined Taesun in 20 minutes. Her hands moved with confidence. She felt his ribs, checked the wound, sniffed the bandage, then turned to Daniel. Who bandaged him? Me. Not bad for a layperson. The ribs will set themselves if he doesn't move for 2 weeks. The wound is clean. Strangely clean for a 2-day-old wound, but I won't ask. She applied a new bandage. She gave Taesun the herbal tea through a funnel because he was still unconscious. She checked his pulse. She straightened up. He'll live. I'll come back tomorrow to check the stitches. Daniel nodded. Then he said something he hadn't planned to say. How much do I owe you? Haeyeon looked at him. Strange. Usually people don't ask. Usually they toss a coin and leave. I'm asking because I want to pay fairly. Haeyeon paused. 3 silver coins. Daniel didn't know how much that was, but he knew he didn't have a single coin. He looked toward the garden. The peach tree was in bloom. On the lowest branch, a golden fruit. Just one. Wait. He went out into the garden. He walked up to the tree. He touched the branch. The fruit fell into his palm on its own, warm, heavy, smelling of summer. He came back and placed the peach on the table in front of Haeyeon. This is all the money I have. Haeyeon looked at the peach, then at the dead trees outside the window, then at that one blossoming tree, then at Daniel. Where did you get it? From the tree in the yard. The trees are dead, except for one. Haeyeon took the peach, brought it to her face, inhaled, and for a second, her face changed. Something flinched. Something deeply hidden rose to the surface and immediately retreated. This isn't worth 3 silver coins. It's worth more than that. She put the peach in her bag. She stood up. She walked toward the door. Daniel called out to her. Hyun. She turned around. What do you like to cook? She froze. Not heal, cook. Hyun stood in the doorway and was silent. A second, 2, 3. Then she answered quietly. Buckwheat noodles. And she left. Kim stood by the wall and watched. When Hyun left, he walked over to Daniel. Why did you ask? Daniel looked at the closed door. Because her whole life, people have only asked her what she knows how to treat. Kim paused. You're a strange host. I know. That evening, Taesong woke up. Daniel was sitting beside him. The fencer opened his eyes. He looked at the ceiling, then at Daniel. Young master. His voice was weak, hoarse. I'm not Jin-ho. Daniel had decided to tell the truth to everyone who entered this house. Taesong stared at him. His cloudy eyes cleared slightly. How is that? It's a long story. You need to stay in bed for 2 weeks. I'll tell you when you're back on your feet. Taesong was silent. Then he asked, The house is intact. Intact, Yuna. I'm looking for her. Taesong closed his eyes. His hand lay on his chest and his fingers tightened slightly. He fell asleep. But before that, he said, Then I'm staying. The ground beneath the floor hummed quietly. The boundary expanded another 3 meters. In the morning, Daniel found a sack on the kitchen threshold. The bag contained buckwheat flour. He looked at the gate. Hyun had already left. She hadn't even come inside. She just left the bag and left. Daniel stood there with the bag in his hands and smiled. His second smile in 3 days. Kim appeared behind him. What is this? Ingredients. Kim looked at the bag. By the end of the first week, there were 5 people living at the estate. Daniel, Kim, Miri, Taesong, and Hyun, who came every day to check on the wounded man and left before dark. She didn't stay overnight. She came in the morning. She worked. She left. Every time, she left something at the doorstep. A bag of grain, a bundle of herbs, a bottle of oil. She never spoke of it. Daniel never once asked. By the end of the week, the grounds had expanded to include the stable and the entire garden. 4 dead peach trees had come back to life. Not all of them. 4 out of 12. The ones that stood closer to the house. The ones that remembered better. They bloomed and bore fruit. Not much, 3 or 4 peaches a day. But that was enough. Daniel sold them through Kim at the market. 1 peach cost as much as 5 ordinary ones. Buyers didn't understand why. It was simply that these peaches smelled the way peaches haven't smelled in 200 years, as if summer were real. With the money he earned, Kim bought food, tools, and nails. Daniel repaired the house. Every day, from morning until dark. He patched a crack in the ceiling of the main hall. He restored the 4th leg of the table. He repaired 3 doors. He replaced the rotten floorboards in 2 rooms. Kim helped. Miri helped. Even Taesun tried to help from his cot until Hyun threatened to sew him to the mattress. Taesun fell silent. On the 5th day, Daniel sat in the study on the 2nd floor and sorted through papers. All that remained after the ransacking. Scraps of letters, household records, a draft will written in Jinho's father's hand. Daniel read slowly. The language came more easily with each passing day. Someone else's memory unfolded like an old suitcase, layer by layer. Words, phrases, names. He could already read without stumbling. Among the papers, he found what he was looking for. A list of the So clan's land holdings over the past 100 years, with boundary descriptions, with registration numbers, with the names of notaries. Daniel spread the list out on the table and studied it for 3 hours. In its heyday, the So clan owned a quarter of the Eastern District, 18 plots, residential buildings, commercial spaces, 2 warehouses, a mill. All of this had been seized over the past 3 months, each plot under a separate forged document. 18 forgeries, 18 notarizations, 18 signatures that could be challenged if procedural violations were found. Daniel began to draw up a table. Plot, date of seizure, basis, notary, current owner, weakness. He filled out 6 rows that evening. He found at least one violation on each one. In one case, the date on the deed was earlier than the date of the previous owner's death. A dead person cannot sign a deed. In another case, the witness was a minor. In the third, the seal was upside down. Daniel looked at the table and didn't know whether to cry or laugh. The silver scroll operated with a lack of integrity. They didn't even try to produce high-quality forgeries. They simply knew that no one would check, because those who do check are found in a ditch by morning. On the 6th day, a visitor arrived. The ground reported it within a minute. One person, a man, elderly, unarmed, measured steps, intent, curiosity. Daniel went out to the gate. Standing there was a man in his 50s, wearing a plain brown coat, an ordinary face, nothing remarkable, eyes behind thin glasses, a habit of adjusting them with 2 fingers. In his hand, a briefcase made of worn leather. Master Huan. The foreign memory did not know him, but Kim had described him accurately, the head of the local branch of the Silver Scroll, the man behind every eviction in the Eastern District, the man who signed the order to raise the So estate. Daniel looked at him through the gate. Huan smiled. The smile was even, professional, the smile of a man who 14 hours a day and has forgotten what sincerity looks like. Young man, I heard you were alive. What a joy. Daniel remained silent. Huang adjusted his glasses. I'd like to discuss the situation, peacefully, civilized, like 2 reasonable people. Daniel looked at him for another second. Then he opened the gate. Come in. Huan stepped inside and froze. Daniel saw how his face changed. For a single second, a micro-expression. Huan sensed something. Not as keenly as Daniel, not like the host, but something ancient and heavy touched the soles of his feet, and he felt it. The moment passed. Huan was smiling again. They sat down in the main hall. Daniel poured tea. Kim had brewed it from Hae-young's herbs. Huan accepted the cup with both hands. He thanked him, took a sip, and began to speak. He spoke softly and sensibly about how an unfortunate misunderstanding had occurred, that the guild had no intention of causing harm, that the matter could be settled amicably, compensation, new housing in a different neighborhood, a modest allowance, everything a young man without a family needs for a peaceful life. Daniel listened. He drank his tea. He didn't interrupt. Huan spoke for 15 minutes. When he finished, Daniel set his cup down on the table. Master Huan, I have listened carefully to your proposal. Now let me respond. Huan nodded, still smiling. You're offering me compensation for property you didn't take from me, because it's impossible to take it. The deed presented by your bailiff contains a forged seal. I can prove it. I have the original family charter with a triple seal. Your document has a single seal. This means there is no legal basis for the seizure is absent. Huan stopped smiling. But besides that, Daniel pulled his spreadsheet out from under the table. I conducted a preliminary audit of 6 of the 18 plots seized from the So clan over the past 3 months. On each one, I found between 1 and 3 procedural violations. A deed dated after the signatory's death, no minor witness, an upside-down seal, absence of a notary witness during certification. Huan sat motionless. I haven't finished reviewing the remaining 12 plots yet, but I can assume the results will be similar. Therefore, my counteroffer is as follows. You return all 18 plots. You withdraw all lawsuits, and sign an official acknowledgement that the documents are forged. Huan adjusted his glasses. His hand didn't tremble, but the movement was slightly faster than usual. Young man, You understand who you're talking to. I understand. With the head of the local branch of an organization that systematically forges documents. That's not the kind of position people usually use to make threats. Silence. Juan looked at Daniel. Daniel looked at Juan. The tea was getting cold. Then Juan stood up. You're making a mistake. Perhaps, but it's documented. And your mistakes? No. Juan walked toward the door. The door opened on its own before him. He stopped in the doorway. He turned around. His face was calm, but the eyes behind his glasses had changed. You'll get an answer. I'm waiting. Juan left. The door closed. Daniel sat at the table and looked at his hands. They weren't shaking. In his past life, he'd talked to people far more terrifying. To developers who hired thugs to evict the elderly. With officials who signed warrants for an envelope of cash. With lawyers who smiled exactly the same way. The difference was that in his past life, the law stood behind him. And here, the house stood behind him. A house that heard. Kim entered the room. He had been standing behind the wall, listening to the entire conversation. You know what's coming. Yes. They'll come. Yes. Not with papers. No. Daniel looked at Kim. In my past life, after conversations like this, they set my car on fire. Twice. I'm used to it. Kim shook his head. Here, they don't set cars on fire. Here, they set people on fire. Daniel paused. Then he stood up. He walked to the door. He stopped at the threshold. Kim, yes? Make me a list of all the families in the Eastern District that the Silver Scroll has evicted over the past year. Names, addresses of their former homes, current whereabouts, if you know them. Why? Because they're our future plaintiffs. Kim stood there looking at him. Then he said quietly, You don't just want to keep this house. No. Then what do you want? I want to get all the houses back. All of them. Every single one. Kim was silent for 10 seconds. Daniel counted. Then the old man nodded. I'll make a list. On the 7th day, Haiyan arrived in the morning as usual. She checked on Tae-sun. His ribs were healing twice as fast as normal. The wound on his side had almost closed. Haiyan looked at it and said nothing. Then she said, This isn't normal. I know. How? Daniel paused. The house is helping. Haiyan looked at the walls, at the floor, at the ceiling with the repaired crack. The house. Yes, the house. She didn't ask any more questions. Instead, she sat down at the kitchen table and didn't leave. Daniel placed a cup of tea in front of her. Then he set a bag of buckwheat flour next to it. The very one she had left on the doorstep 3 days ago. Haiyan looked at the bag. I thought it would be right for you to make it yourself. Here, the kitchen is at your disposal. Haiyan was silent. She looked at the bag and at the kitchen, and Daniel could see something happening inside her. Something was quiet and slow, like when water finds a crack in a rock and begins to seep through. She had been used her whole life. Relatives used her gift to heal their friends. Customers at the market used her hands and paid her in copper. No one had ever offered her a kitchen and told her to cook whatever she wanted. Haiyan stood up. Silently, she picked up the bag. Silently, she lit the stove and began to cook. The noodles were ready in an hour. She called Miri. Miri called Kim. Kim called Daniel. The 4 of them sat down at the table. They brought a bowl to Tae-sun's room. The noodles were hot, with sesame seeds, with finely chopped greens, with broth that was steaming and whose aroma filled the entire first floor. Miri was eating so fast that Kim scolded her. Then he looked at his own bowl and began to eat just as slowly. Haiyan sat across from Daniel and watched them eat. Her face bore an expression Daniel had seen only once before, in Seoul, when a widow with 3 children received a court order to reclaim her apartment and stood in the hallway, clutching the paper to her chest. The expression of someone who had been given back something they'd forgotten they ever had. After lunch, Hyeon stood up and walked toward the door. She stopped at the threshold. She turned around. "You have rooms." 12. 12 rooms and one doctor who comes here every day, crossing half the city. Logic suggests a solution. Hyeon stood there looking at him. Daniel waited. She didn't smile, but something in her face relaxed. Hwan's reply came on the 9th day. Not on paper, at night. Daniel woke up because the earth was screaming. Not in his ears, in the soles of his feet, in his spine, in his teeth. A sharp impulse, danger, the border, the eastern wall, 4 men, weapons, poison on the blades. He leaped up and was at the window in a second. Jinho's body was faster than his own had been in his past life, young and trained, though exhausted. Beyond the wall, in the alley, stood 4 shadows, black clothing, hoods, short blades in their hands. Professionals. Not mercenaries with clubs like the ones who came with the bailiff. Real killers. The ground revealed everything. Poison on the blades, pale green, a paralyzing agent. 1 scratch and the victim couldn't move for 6 hours, long enough to carry them out of the house, long enough to sign any document with someone else's hand. Daniel stood by the window and thought. They were outside the territory, in alley. He sensed them but couldn't affect them. The ground ended 3 meters from the wall, 3 meters of emptiness between his power and their blades. They were waiting. Daniel waited. One of the 4 moved toward the wall. He sized it up. The earth suggested he was looking for a foothold, a crack between the stones, a ledge. Daniel placed his palm on the wall from the inside. The stones shifted, not much, by a millimeter, but the crack the killer had felt vanished. The wall became smooth as glass. A quiet sound came from outside. Surprise. He tried again, in a different spot. Daniel sealed that one too. 3rd attempt, 4th. Each time the wall sealed itself before his fingers could find a foothold. Daniel stood with his eyes closed, feeling every touch against the outer surface of the wall. 5 minutes, 10. By the 15th minute, they were gone. Quietly, without a word. They vanished into the darkness of the alley. Daniel stood by the window and breathed. His heart was pounding. They'll be back. Night visits are just the beginning. He went downstairs. Kim was sitting in the kitchen, awake, a cane in his hands. The old man had faced them as best he could. 4 of them. Knives with poison. Kim nodded, his face dark. The Night Guild. Hwan had hired the shadows. The shadows? Kim explained. Assassins for hire. Not the most expensive, but reliable. They work in 4s, specialization, infiltration and extraction, not murder. Their task was to get Daniel out of the house, alive, because a dead estate owner would raise questions. But a living owner, who voluntarily signed over the estate, wouldn't. Paralyzed. A signature in someone else's hand. Daniel had seen this in Seoul. Different methods, same idea. The walls stopped them. But that means next time they'll try something different. The door, the roof, a tunnel, or they'll wait until I go out. Kim looked at him. Don't go out. I have to go out. Yuna is in town. The documents are in court. I can't reclaim the land from this courtroom. Kim was silent, because Daniel was right. In the morning, Daniel gathered everyone in the main hall. 5 people at the table. Kim, Miri, Taesong, who was already able to sit, Hyeon, and himself. He told them about the night's visitors, without exaggeration. 4 of them. Poison, a mission, extraction. The walls held. Taesong turned pale, not from fear, out of rage. His hand reached for his side where a sword had once hung. Daniel shook his head. You can't stand yet. I can sit with a sword. Daniel allowed himself a small smirk. Hyeon sat quietly. Then she spoke. You need security outside the compound. I don't have money for security. You don't need money. You need Lee Min-soo. Daniel looked at Hyeon. Kim looked too. Taesong raised an eyebrow. Who? The former captain of the city guard. Hyeon said it flatly. She was fired 4 months ago for refusing to carry out an eviction order. Since then, she's been living in the lower city, renting a room, getting by on odd jobs. You know her. I treated her after 3 of her former colleagues decided to show her what happens to those who don't follow orders. Silence at the table. Where is she? The Lame Mule Tavern, corner of 2nd and Market. Daniel looked at Kim. Kim shook his head. That's across the entire lower city. Through the area where they're looking for you right now. I know. Daniel stood up. Haeon stood up too. I'll go with you. You? People know me at the market. A woman with a basket of herbs doesn't attract attention. A man alone in the lower city after a night visit from the shadows is a target. Daniel wanted to object. He didn't. She was right. They left an hour later. Daniel had changed into Kim's old clothes. Haeon walked beside him, a basket of herbs on her shoulder. She looked like a herbalist on her way to a client. Daniel carried her bag. He looked like an apprentice. The city was different during the day. Noisier, safer. But Daniel felt a void beneath his feet. Every step without the Earth's response was a reminder. Here, you're nobody. Here, you can be killed. They reached the Lame Mule in 40 minutes. The tavern was low and dark and smelled of sour beer. There were few patrons during the day. 3 men at the far table were playing dice. An old man at the bar was sleeping with his face in a plate. And in the corner by the wall sat a woman. Tall. You could tell even from where she sat. Straight back, as if a ruler were tied to her spine. Short-cropped hair, a men's shirt. An empty mug stood in front of her. She stared at the wall without blinking. Haeon approached first. Min-soo. The woman turned her head. Her eyes were dark, empty. Not dead, but close. Daniel knew that look. He'd seen it in the mirror after losing his 3rd case in a row, and his client was evicted onto the street with her infant. The look of a man who had stopped believing that doing the right thing works. Haeon, you can sit down. Min-soo shrugged, a gesture that meant, I don't care. They sat down. Daniel was silent. He watched. Min-soo ignored him. She looked at Haeon. Hands. Haeon gestured. Unharmed. That's not why. Haeon nodded at Daniel. He wants to talk. Min-soo turned to him, assessing glance. Quick, professional. She read him in 3 seconds. Skinny, young, not a fighter. Hands without calluses from weapons. Clothes that aren't his. Nice boots. So he's not poor. So someone needs something. Speak. Daniel pulled a rolled-up sheet of paper from his bosom. He placed it in front of her. Min-soo looked at the paper, without touching it. What is this? A draft of the So Estate's internal regulations. Min-soo looked up at him. I need a man who will turn this into a document that people will fear more than they fear me. Min-soo looked at him, then at the paper, then back at him. You're from the So clan. I'm the head of the So clan. The So clan is destroyed. The house stands. Min-soo was silent. Then she picked up the paper, unfolded it, began to read. Her eyes moved across the lines, and Daniel saw something change in them, slowly, like dawn. Clause 1. Anyone who enters the estate's grounds is under the protection of the owner until they violate the house rules. Point 2. The use of violence on the grounds without the owner's permission is prohibited. The violator loses the right to remain on the grounds. Point 3. All disputes are resolved through arbitration, verbal or written. Point 4. Do not speak to the ceiling. The ceiling is busy. Minsu paused at the fourth point. She looked at Daniel. What does the ceiling is busy mean? The ceiling is busy. Minsu stared at him for another 3 seconds. Then what Daniel had been waiting for happened. The corners of her lips twitched. Not a smile, the shadow of a smile. The first in 6 months. This is the worst code of conduct I've ever seen in my life. I know. That's why I need a professional. Minsu placed the paper on the table. She straightened up. Her back became even straighter. I'm a former captain of the guard. I was fired for insubordination. I have no license, no references, no income. 3 people I considered friends broke 2 of my ribs a month ago because I refused to shut up. Daniel listened, without interrupting. I don't need a contract. I need a job. Daniel nodded. There's a job. The estate is expanding. There are more people. We need someone to restore order. You. Minsu looked him in the eyes. What are you offering me? Blood. Food. Walls that keep out those who come with poison on their blades. And a job that makes sense. Minsu was silent for a long time. The mug in front of her was empty. The table was dirty. The tavern walls were gray. And sitting across from her was a man who held out a piece of paper and said, You'll turn this into law. She stood up. My things are in the room upstairs. 5 minutes. She returned after 4. A single bag on her back, a sword at her belt. The 3 of them walked back together. Minsu walked slightly ahead, hand on the hilt, eyes on every alley, on every roof, on every shadow. Daniel followed her and, for the first time in a week, didn't count the seconds until they returned to the territory. When they entered the gate, the earth accepted Minsu instantly, even faster than the rest, as if it had been waiting. Daniel felt the boundary expand, not 3 meters, 10, all at once. The territory spilled over the wall and engulfed a stretch of the street. Minsu stopped in the courtyard. She looked at the peach trees in bloom, at the well, at the house with its patched-up walls. Miri peeked out the door. Taesong was looking out the window. Kim stood in the doorway with a stick. Hyeon walked past her toward the kitchen, and a minute later, the smell of something hot wafted out. Minsu stood and watched. Then she turned to Daniel. The draft will be ready by morning. It was ready by midnight. 24 points. Clear, tough, professional. Daniel read it and didn't find a single unnecessary word. Minsu added the 25th point on her own. The ceiling remains occupied until further notice. Daniel hung the charter on the wall of the main hall. By morning, everyone had read it. Miri asked what point 12, regarding the mediation procedure, meant. Kim explained. Tae-sun said that point 9, prohibiting bladed weapons in common areas, personally offended him. Minsu replied that Clause 9 was not up for discussion. Hyeon said that Clause 17, regarding sanitary standards, was poorly written and suggested revisions. Minsu accepted the revisions and rewrote the clause in 10 minutes. Daniel stood by the wall and watched as 6 people argued over the bylaws of a house that had been in ruins just a week ago, and the ground beneath his feet hummed quietly, content. The second week began with Tae-sung getting back on his feet. Hyeon allowed him to walk, but forbade him from lifting anything heavier than a spoon. Tae-sung listened, and an hour later went out into the courtyard with a sword. Hyeon saw him from the window. She went out. She stood silently. Tae-sung looked at her. He laid the sword on the ground. He picked up the spoon he'd brought with him. He made 3 lunges with the spoon in the air. Hyon turned and walked away, but Daniel saw her hide her face. She was laughing. For the first time ever. Taesong turned out to be more useful than Daniel had expected, not as a fighter, as a source of information. He had served as a guard for the clan for 13 years. He knew every guard in the Eastern District, every merchant, every beggar, and he knew where to look for Yuna. Not exactly, but he had a lead. On the night of the pogrom, he saw a cart, black, no identifying marks. It drove off to the east, but not on the main road, through the alleys of the lower city, through the Weavers' district. Tayson was wounded and couldn't follow it, but he remembered the direction, the Weavers' quarter, the eastern outskirts. Daniel unfolded the city map that Kim had drawn from memory. The Weavers' district was sandwiched between the river and the warehouse district, the place where the Silver Scroll operated 3 workhouses. Officially, they were called workshops, weaving production, cheap labor. Unofficially, they were prisons, debtors, orphans, those taken away for unpaid debts, real or fake. Yoon was 16. She knew how to embroider. Daniel knew this from someone else's memory. An embroiderer, a valuable worker for a weaving workshop. Daniel clenched his fists. Then he unclenched them. Then he sat down at the table and began to think. In his past life, he had pulled people out of situations like this, not by force, with paperwork, court, a lawsuit, a request to inspect the conditions of detention, a demand to produce the employment contract. If there is no contract, it is forced labor. If the contract was signed by a minor, it is invalid. If the contract was signed under duress, it is void. He needed to get to court. Daniel looked at Kim. Tell me about the court system. Kim talked for 2 hours. The court in this city consisted of 3 chambers: the commercial chamber, the land chamber, the criminal chamber. The land chamber handled property disputes. That was where the lawsuit to reclaim the land needed to be filed. There were 5 judges. 2 were members of the Silver Scroll. 1 was neutral, and 2 were considered honest. The eldest of the honest judges was named Park Jong-ho, a 70-year-old man, a former legal scholar at the royal court. He had retired to the provinces because he could no longer breathe at court. He had handled land cases for 40 years and had never once taken a bribe. The Silver Scroll had left him alone because his name was too well known. Removing him would mean drawing the capital's attention. Daniel wrote down the name. Park Jong-ho, the land chamber. That was his trump card. If the case went to Jung-ho, the Silver Scroll would have no way to pressure the court. But to do that, he had to file the lawsuit correctly. Daniel spent the day studying the procedure. Kim helped. Hyon unexpectedly helped as well. Her impoverished family had once conducted business at the land chamber, and she knew the filing procedure. Daniel drafted the lawsuit in 3 days, 8 pages, in neat handwriting, in a language he now spoke almost fluently. A lawsuit to invalidate the deed on the grounds of forgery of the family seal, with the original family charter attached, with the bailiff's receipt attached, listing 3 procedural violations. He reread the text 4 times, corrected 2 phrases that sounded too Korean, revised the wording that Kim had noted as outdated. He added a reference to the inheritance law that Haeyeon had found in an old reference book. On the 4th day of the 2nd week, it was ready. The lawsuit lay on the table, clean, neat, with the So Clan seal in the lower corner, 3 impressions, facing east. Now he had to take it to court. And the court was in the city center, a 30-minute walk from the estate, 30 minutes outside the territory, without protection, with papers that could destroy the Silver Scroll's scheme. Minsu stood by the door and waited, sword at her belt, back straight, eyes sharp. Daniel looked at her, ready. She didn't answer. She just stepped out first. They walked through the city together, Minsu half a step ahead. She moved like someone who had patrolled these streets for 20 years, every turn familiar, every alleyway checked. She saw the danger before Daniel had time to think about it. Twice she changed the route, without explanation. She'd just turn, and Daniel followed. At the 3rd turn, he asked, "What was it?" 2 men on the roof, with crossbows, lookouts. They reached the courthouse in 40 minutes instead of 30. The detours cost time, but not lives. The courthouse was housed in a stone building with columns, old and dusty. Daniel stepped inside, and for a second it seemed to him that he had returned to the Seoul District Court. The same smell of paper and ink, the same silence in the hallways, the same weary faces of the clerks. The land chamber's office was on the second floor, a small room, 2 desks. At one sat a young clerk with ink stains on his fingers. Daniel placed the complaint on the desk, a petition to invalidate the deed, the So Clan versus the Silver Scroll Guild. The clerk looked up. He looked at Daniel. He looked at the papers. Then he turned pale. Against the Silver Scroll, Daniel silently pointed to the line where the defendant's name stood. The clerk read it. Then he read it again. His hands trembled. This. Are you sure? I'm sure. Register it and issue a receipt number. The clerk stared at him for another 10 seconds. Then he slowly picked up his quill, dipped it in ink, and began filling out the registry. His hand was shaking, but his handwriting was legible. Number 847, fraction 3, land registry. Date of receipt, office seal. Daniel took the copy with the receipt number. He folded it neatly. He tucked it into his coat pocket. The clerk looked at him as if he were a man walking into a burning house. Daniel nodded to him and walked out. Minsu was waiting by the door. Daniel looked at her. Done. The walk back took 35 minutes. Minsu took a different route, longer but through crowded streets. When they entered the gate, Daniel felt as if the earth had embraced him. That's exactly how it was. Not just warmth, an embrace. He stood in the courtyard and breathed. Then he took out a copy of the lawsuit and showed it to Kim. The old man read it. His hands didn't tremble, but when he looked up, his eyes were wet. Number 847, Section 3. The first lawsuit against the Silver Scroll in 30 years. Daniel hung the copy on the wall next to the charter. Miri came over and read it. She didn't understand half the words, but she got the gist. Someone had finally put on paper what the whole town was afraid to say out loud. That evening, Daniel sat in his office working on the remaining 12 sections. Hyeon brought him tea and noodles. She set them down silently. She left. An hour later, she returned. The tea was untouched. The noodles had gone cold. Daniel hadn't noticed. He was poring over the papers, and his eyes burned with that light that Hyeon had already learned to recognize. The light of a man who had found a weak spot in the wall and was now hammering at a single point. She took away the cold noodles. She brought him hot ones. She set them right on top of the papers. Daniel looked up. Eat, then work. You're the only one who can file these lawsuits. If you collapse from hunger, we'll all lose. Daniel looked at her, then at the noodles, then back at her. He picked the chopsticks. He started eating. Hyeon sat down across from him. She didn't leave until he had finished. Then she took the bowl and left. She stopped at the door. How many districts are left? 12. Did you find violations? In all of them. Hyeon nodded. Something in her gaze had changed. Daniel didn't understand what. Then he understood. Respect. Not gratitude, not affection. Respect for a man who does work on which lives depend, and does it right. In the 3rd week, people started coming, not one at a time, in groups. Word of the quiet courtyard spread through the lower city like water through cracks in stone, quietly, unstoppably. The blacksmith's family was the first to arrive, a man in his 40s, his wife, 2 sons. The younger was 5, the older was 11. They had been evicted from the smithy a month ago. The smithy stood on land that the Silver Scroll had registered under a frontman. The deed had the same set of irregularities as all the others. The blacksmith stood at the gate, wringing his cap in his hands. His wife held the younger son in her arms. The older one stood nearby, looking up from under his brows. Daniel opened the gate. He looked at the blacksmith. Name, Pan Doksu. Your smithy stood on plot number 14 in the Eastern District Registry. The blacksmith flinched. "Where are you from? I have a list." Daniel stepped aside. "Come in. The fourth room on the right is vacant." They entered. The blacksmith's wife was crying. "Hush." She pressed her face against her youngest son's head. Daniel didn't try to comfort her. He led them to the room. He showed them where the kitchen was, where the well was, where the outhouse was. Then he stopped at the door and said, "The charter on the wall in the main hall. Read this. Point 4 is not up for discussion." The blacksmith looked at him blankly. Then he nodded. The earth rumbled. The border expanded. The next day, 3 more arrived. An old woman with her grandson, the former owner of a tea shop. Her grandson was 8. Then 2 more. Then 4. By the end of the 3rd week, there were 14 people on the estate. Daniel counted the rooms. 12 rooms, 14 people. The blacksmith family in one, the old woman and her grandson in another. It was starting to get cramped. But the territory grew with every new resident. The courtyard grew larger. The stable expanded. A space appeared behind the eastern wall that had previously been part of the alley. Daniel stood in the middle of the courtyard and sensed the boundaries. The territory was no longer a rectangle. It grew unevenly. Wherever there were people, the blacksmith's room to the east, the boundary stretched eastward. The old woman's room to the south, the boundary stretched southward. The territory followed those it protected. Minsu drew up a duty roster. Taeson, who could already walk without support, took the night shift. The blacksmith proved useful. He repaired the gate in a day. He installed a new hinge. He forged a bolt from an iron rod he found in the stable. He didn't need a forge. He needed fire and metal. Daniel found an old brazier in the basement. The blacksmith looked at it and nodded. 2 days later, there was a makeshift forge in the courtyard. Small, but functional. The blacksmith forged nails, hinges, staples, everything needed for repairs. Daniel paid him with what he had: shelter, food, shelter, and peaches. 7 of the 12 peach trees were already in bloom. They yielded 10 fruits a day, enough for everyone and for sale. The money went toward flour and oil. On the 23rd day, Daniel received a summons from the court. The clerk delivered it personally, pale and sweaty. He handed over the envelope and ran off. Daniel opened the envelope in the main hall. Kim stood nearby, Minsu behind him. The hearing for case 847-3 was scheduled for 10 days later. The judge, Park Jong-ho. Daniel read the name and closed his eyes. Jong-ho, an honest judge. The case had ended up where it needed to be. He didn't know how. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe the court office decided the case was too high profile for corrupt judges. Maybe the land itself had somehow influenced it. It didn't matter. The fact was the fact. In 10 days, he would stand before a judge who didn't take bribes, with documents proving the forgery, with the original deed, with the bailiff's receipt. 10 days. Daniel began to prepare. He worked 16 hours a day. He wrote, he rewrote, he checked every argument, every reference to the law, every piece of evidence. Hayan brought him food 3 times a day and stood there until he finished eating. Minsu checked the wording. She knew court procedure. 6 years in the guard had given her the right to attend hearings, and she had memorized every rule. Kim talked about Judge Jung-ho, his habits, his style of presiding over hearings, what he liked, what he couldn't stand. Jung-ho hated verbosity. He demanded facts, only facts. Daniel rewrote the speech. He cut it down from 8 pages to 3, then to 2, then to 1.5. Every word in its place, every argument as solid as a nail in a board. On the 25th day, what Daniel had been waiting for and fearing happened. He returned from a walk around the grounds and found a man at the gate. Not a refugee, not a mercenary. An old man, short, thin, gray hair down to his shoulders, modest but clean clothes, a canvas bag with books slung over his shoulder. The earth was silent, completely. Daniel stood at the gate and felt the silence beneath his feet. For the first time since that morning when he had activated the bonds, the earth had not spoken a word. The old man stood and looked at the house. His face was calm. His eyes... Daniel looked into those eyes and saw something he couldn't name. Depth. Not wisdom, not old age, something else. Like a well whose bottom cannot be seen. "Good afternoon." The old man turned to him. His voice was soft, with a slight hoarseness. "I am a bookseller. I was told that the master of the Quiet Court is interested in old scrolls." Kim had indeed been asking around the market about books on land law. Daniel nodded. "I have something to offer." The old man took 2 scrolls out of his bag. He placed them in his palm. One was titled, "The Land Survey Code of the First Clans." The second, "On Land Rights and the Landowner's Duties." Daniel took the first scroll. He unrolled it. The text was old, archaic language, but he grasped the essence instantly. It was an ancient cadastral code, rules for determining boundaries, the order of land inheritance, the transfer procedure, and a clause that made him freeze. Land cannot be transferred without the consent of the land itself. Daniel reread it. Then again. Then he looked up at the bookseller. The old man stood there, smiling, barely noticeable, just with his eyes. "Where did you find this?" "In the basement. I have a large basement." "How much?" "1 peach." Daniel looked at him. A bookseller in modest clothes was asking for 1 peach in exchange for a 300-year-old scroll, one that contained a clause capable of overturning all of Heden's land laws. 1 peach. Daniel went into the garden, picked a peach, came back, held it out. The old man took the fruit. He held it to his face. He inhaled. And for a second, something in his face changed. Something ancient and aching shone through the calm mask. The second passed. His face returned to normal. The old man nodded. He tucked the peach into his bag. He turned and walked away. Daniel stood at the gate and watched him go. The earth was silent. Then, when the old man turned the corner, the earth sighed. Heavily, like a person who had seen in a dream someone they had long since lost. Daniel looked down, then at the corner behind which the bookseller had disappeared, then down again. Who was he? The earth did not answer, but Daniel remembered the face. Judgment Day. Daniel woke up 2 hours before dawn. He lay on the floor of his room and stared at the ceiling. The earth hummed beneath his back, quietly and steadily, like a heartbeat. He got up, washed his face, put on the clean clothes Kim had managed to get at the market. A white shirt, a dark cloak. Not luxurious, but dignified. Daniel looked into the shard of mirror that Miri had hung in the hallway. Jinho's face was staring back at him. Young, thin, with dark eyes. A stranger's face that had become his own. He went down to the living room. Kim and Min-soo were already sitting at the table. Haeyeon stood by the stove. Papers lay on the table. A claim, a family charter, a bailiff's receipt, a list of violations, a book dealer's scroll with ancient land survey regulations. Daniel sat down. He went over the papers one last time. Everything was in place. Haeyeon placed a bowl of noodles in front of him. He looked at her. "Eat." He ate. Min-soo checked the sword. The two of them went out together, just like last time. But this time, Taesong stood at the gate and said one sentence. "I'm coming too." Daniel looked at him. Taesong stood straight, hand on the hilt. His side was Pa. His face was pale but resolute. Haeyeon stepped out onto the porch. She looked at Taesong. She opened her mouth, closed it. Then she said, "If the stitches come apart, I'll sew you up without anesthesia." Taesong nodded. He understood. The three of them walked out, Min-soo in front. Taesong on the right, Daniel between them, with a briefcase of papers pressed to his chest. The city greeted them with the noise of the morning. Daniel counted the intersections. Minsu counted the shadows on the rooftops. Taesun counted the people who stared too long. They made it there without incident. The courthouse was the same, stone, dusty, with columns. But today there were people standing at the entrance. 10, 20, 30. Daniel stopped. Where did they come from? Kim. The old man had made it. He had spread the word through the market vendors. Case 847-3, the first lawsuit against the Silver Scroll. People had come to watch, not to help, not to support, just to watch, because no one believed it was possible. Daniel pushed through the crowd. People parted. They watched. They were silent. He entered the building. He went up to the second floor. The courtroom was small, 10 benches for spectators, the judge's bench on a raised platform, 2 tables for the parties. Daniel sat down at the plaintiff's table. He placed the papers in front of him, neatly, carefully, every document in its place. 2 people were already seated at the defendant's table, a man in an expensive overcoat, a guild lawyer, and next to him, Master Juan, wearing the same glasses, carrying the same briefcase, with the same smile. Juan looked at Daniel. He nodded, politely, as if greeting an acquaintance at a reception. Daniel nodded in return. The judge entered 5 minutes later. Park Jung-ho, 70 years old, short, thin, a white beard, hands like a bird's, slender fingers, sharp eyes under heavy eyelids. He sat down at the table, placed a blank sheet of paper in front of him, dipped his quill in ink, and he announced, Case 847-3, Plaintiff, the So Clan, Defendant, the Silver Scroll Guild, Subject, Declaration of the deed of sale as invalid. The floor is open to the plaintiff. Daniel stood up. His heart was beating steadily. His hands weren't shaking. He uttered 3 words. Your Honor, Judge Cheon-ho. Then he paused for a second and began. He spoke for 12 minutes, not a single superfluous word, fact after fact. The deed to the So clan's estate bears a forged seal. The clan's original seal is applied as a triple impression facing east. On the deed, there is a single impression facing west. Here is the original family charter. Here is the deed. Compare them. Next. The bailiff who inspected the original on site signed a receipt, acknowledging the discrepancy. Here is the receipt. Next. In addition to the forged seal, 3 procedural violations were found in the deed. First, the date of notarization is listed as the 4th day of the 3rd month. On that day, the notary office was closed for the Harvest Festival. Certification on a non-working day is invalid. Second, the witness on the buyer's side is listed as No Sangil. No Sangil died 2 months prior to the date indicated. A dead person cannot be a witness. Third, in the text of the deed, the plot area is listed as 320 square paces. According to the family deed, the area is 450 square paces. A discrepancy of 30% indicates that the drafter of the deed did not have access to the original documents. Daniel fell silent. He placed the papers on the judge's desk. He sat down. The courtroom was silent. Chung-ho looked at the documents. His slender fingers turned the pages, slowly, one sheet after another. He compared the seals. He read the receipt. He checked the dates. Then he looked up at the guild's attorney. The floor is yours, defendant. The lawyer stood up. He was good. Daniel had to admit it. His voice was confident. His demeanor was calm. He began by casting doubt on the plaintiff's identity. The young man calling himself the head of the So clan had presented no proof of his identity. Who could confirm that he was indeed So Jin-ho? Daniel didn't flinch. He had been expecting this. Jung-ho looked at him. The plaintiff. Daniel stood up. Kim, The manager of the So clan, who has served the family for 30 years, is ready to confirm my identity under oath. Furthermore, the family charter I presented was kept in a hiding place known only to family members. Access to it confirms my right. The lawyer didn't give up. He moved on to procedural objections. The bailiff's receipt was obtained under duress. The wording of the complaint contains inaccuracies. The filing deadline has passed. Daniel responded to each one, calmly, with figures, with references to the law. The receipt was obtained voluntarily, as evidenced by the legible handwriting showing no signs of trembling. The wording corresponds to the template approved by the chamber. The filing deadline is calculated from the moment the forgery was discovered, not from the moment the deed was drawn up. Chun-ho listened. He took notes. His pen moved across the paper quickly and precisely. The hearing lasted 2 hours. When the guild's attorney had exhausted his objections, Chun-ho raised his hand. Enough. He paused. He looked at the papers, then at Daniel, then at Juan. Juan sat motionless. The smile had long since vanished from his face. The court grants the claim. The deed to the So clan's estate is declared invalid on the grounds of forgery of the family seal and 3 procedural violations. Ownership is restored to the So clan. The decision takes effect immediately. Silence. Then, behind Daniel, someone exhaled. Then another. Then the benches stirred. People exchanged glances. They couldn't believe it. Daniel stood and looked at the judge. Jung-ho looked up, met his gaze, and nodded ever so slightly. Juan stood up, adjusted his glasses, turned to Daniel. His face was calm, but the eyes behind the lenses were glassy. "We will file an appeal. That is your right." Juan left. The lawyer followed him. Daniel stood in the emptying courtroom, holding the court's decision in his hands. A piece of paper, ordinary paper with ink and a seal, which weighed more than any sword in this world. Minsu was waiting in the hallway. Taesong was by the door. Daniel walked out to them. He showed them the ruling. Minsu read it. Her expression didn't change, but her back grew even straighter, if that was possible. Taesong read it. His hand on the hilt relaxed. For the first time that morning, they stepped out onto the street. The crowd at the entrance had grown. 50 people, maybe more. Someone from the office had already spread the news. People were looking at Daniel. They were silent. Then one man in the crowd took off his hat. Then a second. Then a third. Daniel walked through the silent crowd and headed home. 20 minutes in silence. When he entered the gate, the earth hit him with a wave of heat rising from below, from the soles of his feet to the top of his head. And every tree in the garden bloomed at once, all 12 of them. The courtyard was flooded with white and pink. Petals swirled without a breeze. Miri stood in the middle of it all and laughed. 3 days of silence followed the trial. No mercenaries, no bailiffs, no night visits. The silver scroll was silent. Daniel knew this wasn't surrender. It was regrouping. He used the silence. Every hour of every day. In the morning he worked on the papers, the 12 remaining plots of the So clan. He found violations on every one. Now he was drafting lawsuits, one after another. The template was ready after the first case. Only the numbers, names, and dates changed. But he checked every lawsuit 3 times, because the silver scroll was learning too. After the first loss, they would start plugging the holes, cleaning up the documents, buying new witnesses. He had to file all the lawsuits at the same time, like an avalanche, so they wouldn't have time to react. During the day, he worked on the estate. The number of residents grew to 20, then 22, then 25. There weren't enough rooms. Blacksmith Doc suggested building an addition. There were no materials. Daniel placed his hand on the ground by the eastern wall and asked, "What do you remember?" The earth remembered. A wing had once stood here, a guest house for clan visitors, demolished 20 years ago. But the foundation remained beneath a layer of earth and debris. The blacksmith cleared the foundation in 2 days. The stones lay flat, as if they had been waiting. Daniel placed his palm on the cornerstone. The earth hummed, and the stones began to rise. Not quickly, not magic in the usual sense. Simply, every stone he set in place fell exactly into position, without mortar, without fitting, as if it remembered its place. The blacksmith watched with his mouth agape. Then he closed his mouth and began passing stones. By the evening of the third day, the walls of the wing stood waist-high. Taesung cut beams from old wood in the stable. Minsu organized a construction schedule. Every resident was given a task. The children carried small stones. The old woman from the tea shop cooked dinner for everyone. Hyeon treated blisters and bruises. Daniel built while simultaneously dictating the text of the next lawsuit to Kim. On the evening of the 40th day, Daniel sat in his office. Before him lay 18 completed lawsuits, 18 plots, 18 forgeries, 18 bodies of evidence. He looked at the stack and felt the weight of those papers. Not physical, something else. Behind every lawsuit stood a family, a name, a story, a home that had been taken away. A knock on the door. Hyeon entered, not with food, with a sheet of paper. Read it. Daniel took it. It was a letter, addressed to him, unsigned. The handwriting was even, calligraphic, old-fashioned. The text was short. You're repeating my mistake. Bonds require more than just protection. They require a choice. Everyone you take in ties you to this land more tightly. Someday you won't be able to leave, even if you want to. Think about it while there's still time. Daniel read it again. Then once more. Then he looked at Haeon. Where did you find this? On the doorstep, in the morning, under a rock. Daniel placed the letter on the table. The bookseller. He knew. He couldn't prove it, but he knew. The old man who brought scrolls for a single peach. The land that fell silent in his presence. Eyes like a bottomless well. And now, the letter. You're repeating my mistake. His. 300 years ago, someone else stood in this spot, activated the bonds, accepted people, expanded the border. And then something happened. He left, severed the connection, signed a decree banning ancestral magic. And the bonds fell asleep for 3 centuries. The bookseller, a former time traveler. Daniel sat and thought. The letter warned him, or frightened him, or pleaded with him. He wasn't sure. Everyone you accept binds you to this land more tightly. Daniel looked out the window. In the courtyard, Miri was playing with the blacksmith's youngest son. Taesun was showing the older boy how to hold the stick properly. Kim sat on a bench someone had knocked together yesterday, basking in the sun. Haeon stood by the door, waiting for his answer. Ties you down, Daniel said it out loud. Yes, it binds. So what? Haeon looked at him. You're not afraid. I'm afraid every day. I'm afraid I won't find Yoon in time. Afraid I'll lose the appeal. Afraid that 40 will come at night instead of 4. But I'm not afraid to stay. Haeon was silent. Then she said, All right, and she left. Daniel hid the letter in a hiding place behind the bricks, next to the family charter. The next day, he began searching for Yuna in earnest. Taesung gave him a lead. The Weavers' District, 3 workhouses. He needed to find out which one she was in. He had to do it without drawing attention. He needed someone who could enter a workhouse and leave without raising questions. Daniel thought about it for 2 days. Then he found a solution. Haeon, a healer, an herbalist. The workhouses bought ointments and decoctions for the workers from herbalists, cheap ones, so the workers wouldn't collapse before their time. Haeon could come as a supplier, to inspect the premises, to see the faces. Haeon agreed immediately, without question. She packed a basket with ointments and left at dawn. She returned around noon. Her face was dark. She sat down at the kitchen table. She was silent for a minute. Then she spoke. The first house, 30 workers. Men, weavers. Conditions are poor but tolerable. Second house, 20 workers, women and children, embroidery. Conditions are worse. 12-hour workday, 1 meal a day. Third house, locked. They wouldn't let her in. Guards at the door. 2 of them. They said there was a quarantine inside. Haeyeon looked at Daniel. There's no quarantine. I can smell the dyes through the wall. They're working in there. And they don't want anyone to see who's there. The third house. Daniel wrote down the address. 20 steps from the waterfront. The corner of Tkatskaya and Rechnaya. A 2-story building with barred windows. Yuna was there. He couldn't prove it, but he knew. Now he needed a plan. Not a raid, not an escape. Paperwork. Daniel took out the bookseller's scroll, the land code from the time of the first clans. He reread the section on workhouses. He found what he was looking for. Any detention of a person on the premises without voluntary consent constitutes a violation of the rights of the land on which the building stands. If the detained person is not a minor heir of the clan, the violation is classified as an encroachment on clan rights. Yoon is 16. She is a minor. She is an heir of the So clan. She is being held without consent. This is not merely unlawful detention. It is an encroachment on clan rights. And according to ancient law, it is not only the detainer who is liable. The land on which the building stands is also liable. Daniel began drafting a new lawsuit, not about the land, about a person. A lawsuit for the release of the minor heiress of the So clan, who is being unlawfully detained on the premises of a workhouse belonging to the Silver Scroll Guild. He wrote all night. By dawn, the lawsuit was ready. 6 pages, every line as sharp as a blade. Haeyeon found him in the morning, asleep at the table, his face smeared with ink, the papers neatly folded beneath his hand. Daniel filed all the lawsuits in a single day, 19 of them, 18 against the So clan's estates, and 1 for Yuna's release. Min-soo and Taesong accompanied him. The clerk in the office saw the stack and turned even paler than the first time. Daniel placed the papers on the desk and waited until each lawsuit was assigned a sequential number. 40 minutes, 19 numbers, 19 office seals. The clerk finished registering them and looked at Daniel with the gaze of a man watching someone jump off a cliff into the sea, unsure if there was water below. Daniel took the copies. He nodded. He left. By evening, the whole city knew. 19 lawsuits against the Silver Scroll. From a single man. Whispers rippled through the streets, from the market to the harbor, from the harbor to the upper city, from the upper city back down. Some said the boy from the So clan had gone mad. Others said he was braver than anyone they knew. Still others remained silent and thought. The Silver Scroll responded the next morning, not quietly. Magister Huan came in person, not to the estate, to the court, with a motion to consolidate all 19 cases into a single proceeding and to recuse Judge Chun-ho on the grounds of bias. Daniel found out about it 2 hours later. Kim brought the news from the market. Huan wants to get rid of Chun-ho, to put his own judge in place, and to hear all the cases at once. One trial, one judge, one outcome. Daniel sat at the table. He thought, if the cases were consolidated and handed over to a corrupt judge, he would lose everything. All 19, including the lawsuit regarding Yoon. He had to stop the motion. But how? He didn't know the appeal process in this world well enough. Kim knew the laws, but not court practice. Min-soo knew the guard's procedures, but not the courts. Haeyeon knew medicine. Taesong knew the sword. None of them were lawyers. Daniel sat and thought. Then he stood up. Then he sat down. Then he stood up again. Then he went out into the courtyard. He stood by the well and looked at the water. The earth hummed beneath his feet, anxiously. It sensed his state of mind. A knock at the gate. The earth had warned him first. One person, a woman, young, unarmed, intent, complex, not hostile, but not pure, something hidden, something duplicitous. Daniel walked to the gate. He opened it. Standing on the threshold was a young woman of about 22, expensive clothes, a dark fabric cloak, black gloves, hair tucked under a hat, a face that was both beautiful and stern, quick eyes. They scanned the courtyard in a second, counted the exits, the windows, the distances. That's how a scout looks when entering unfamiliar territory. "Good afternoon." Her voice was even, pleasant, with the professional intonation of someone accustomed to selling. "My name is Jung Sori. I am a real estate appraiser. The Silver Scroll Guild sent me to conduct an inventory of the So Estate's property as part of a counterclaim." She held out a piece of paper, an official form, the guild's seal, Master Kwan's signature. Daniel took the paper. He read it. A counterclaim for reimbursement of property maintenance costs during the period of temporary administration. The guild claimed it had maintained the estate in proper condition after the seizure and was now demanding compensation. Daniel looked at the broken windows, at the patched walls, at the fence the blacksmith had repaired with his own, at the roof they had patched with rags. Proper condition. He put the paper away. He looked at Sori. The earth whispered. A lie. Not in the words, in the intent. This woman hadn't come to appraise the property. She'd come to look for a weak spot, a way to break the bonds, a way to bypass the territory's defenses. Daniel knew it. The earth knew it. And Sori stood before him, waiting for an answer. In a past life, Daniel had seen dozens like her, appraisers who came to the apartments of the elderly and drew up reports with undervalued prices, inspectors who found violations where there were none, inspectors who shut down businesses at the behest of competitors, tools of the system, people who were used. He looked at Sori and saw not a spy, he saw a tool. 22 years old, black gloves hiding what? Scars? Burns? Or just a habit of hiding her hands? Eyes that calculate escape routes because her whole life she'd had to know which way to run. The earth whispered something else. This woman was an orphan. Not a fact, a feeling. Daniel couldn't explain how he knew, but he knew. "Come in." Sori entered. Her step was confident, her posture was straight, her eyes kept scanning. Daniel led her through the house, every room, every hallway, every corner. He hid nothing. He showed her the hall with the charter on the wall. He showed her the kitchen where Heian cooked. He showed her the courtyard with the smithy. He showed her the wing under construction. He showed her the garden with the flowering trees. Sori walked and took notes. The pen moved quickly across the paper. Professional notes, area, condition, materials. But Daniel could see she wasn't just writing that down. She was noting the layout of the people, habits, schedules, routes. She was mapping not the building, but the life inside it. They returned to the hall. Daniel offered tea. Sori accepted. They sat down at the table. Miri brought the cups. Sori looked at the girl. Something flashed in her eyes, quickly, painfully, and it was gone. "You have a nice home." A professional voice. "For your financial situation. The estimated value of the property, taking into account depreciation and current wear and tear, will be approximately..." Daniel raised his hand. "Stop." Sori fell silent. "I know who sent you. I know why. And I know that your report won't say what you saw, but what you were told to write." Sori looked at him. Her expression didn't change. Professional composure. "I'm an appraiser. I record facts. Fact number 1. Daniel pointed at the wall. "I repaired this crack with my own hands on the second day. When the guild seized the house, there wasn't a single intact door in it. Fact number 2. The roof was leaking in 6 places. Fact number 3. There was no food in the pantry because the mercenaries had taken everything. This is the proper maintenance for which the guild is seeking compensation. Sori was silent. She finished her tea. Then she set the cup down. I'll write down what I see. Daniel looked her in the eyes. Then write the truth. And add one thing to the report. What? That the owner is offering you a room. And a job. As an archivist. I need someone who knows how to compile inventories and work with documents. You obviously do. Sori froze. For a single second, her professional facade cracked. Daniel saw beneath it the face of a 22-year-old girl who, for the first time in her life, didn't understand what was happening. If you decide to stay, let me know. If you decide to report it, let me know too. I'll understand. Sori stood up. She thanked him for the tea. She left. Daniel watched her go. The earth hummed quietly, patiently. Min-Su entered the hall a minute later. She had been standing behind the wall listening, the whole conversation. You gave the spy a room. I gave a person a choice. She'll report everything she saw. Maybe. And if she stays, then we'll have the best archivist in town. Min-Su shook her head. What a strange boss. A week passed. Sori didn't come. Daniel didn't wait. He worked. Juan's motion to recuse Jong-ho was considered for 3 days. Daniel filed a counter-motion. He drafted it himself. 4 pages. Every argument was backed up by a reference to the procedural code that Kim had found at the city library. Jong-ho dismissed the motion to recuse himself. Dry and brief. The cases remain separate. The judge remains the same. The grounds for recusal are unproven. Juan lost for the 2nd time. Daniel found out about it in the morning and allowed himself 3 seconds of relief. Then he went back to work. The lawsuit for Yuna's release was scheduled for hearing in 12 days, separate from the land, a different court, a different judge. Daniel didn't know this judge. Kim didn't know him. Min-Su knew him. Judge Nam, 45 years old, not corrupt, but cowardly. He ruled according to the law as long as the law didn't conflict with the interests of the powerful. When it did, he found a loophole. He didn't refuse outright. He postponed. Requested additional expert opinions. The case could drag on for months. And Yuna was in the workhouse now, every day. Daniel needed something that would force Judge Nam to act quickly, something that couldn't be postponed. He thought for 2 days, then he found it. In the ancient land code, there was a clause about the right of blood. If the heir of a clan is held on foreign territory against the will of the clan's land, the clan has the right to make a claim, not through the courts, through itself. Daniel placed his palm on the foundation, earth. Can you hear me, Yuna? Silence. Then a very distant echo. Like an echo in the mountains. She was alive. The earth knew. She was in the city. The earth sensed it. But standing between them were the walls of a stranger's house and streets that belonged to anyone. Daniel withdrew his hand. He needed to expand his territory, to reach out, to at least touch the ground on which the workhouse stood. But for that, he needed people between the estate and the weaver's district, people who would voluntarily remain on his land. One person, one extended boundary. Daniel looked at the map. 30 blocks from the estate to the workhouse. 30 extensions. 30 people. The courtyard couldn't hold that many. No, not like that. He didn't need to extend the territory in a straight line. He needed one person. One. There, near the workhouse. A person who would voluntarily accept his protection and stand on the ground next to the prison. 1 point. 1 bridge. Daniel sat and thought. Who could he send? Who could he trust? Who would go to the Silver Scroll District and stand at the gates of the workhouse? On the 14th night after the trial, there was a knock at the gate. The ground signaled in 10 seconds. One person, a woman, a familiar face, an intention, complex but different, not like last time, deeper, more painful, more honest. Daniel opened the gate. Sori stood on the threshold. No gloves, bare hands, thin white scars on her fingers, traces of childhood burns, a rolled-up sheet of paper tucked under her arm, a tired face. Her eyes were red. 2 weeks without sleep leave their mark. She silently held out the paper. Daniel took it. He unfolded it. A report. A complete inventory of the estate's property, compiled for the Silver Scroll. Detailed, accurate, with a floor plan of the building, with the layout of the staff, with a schedule, with the weak points in the defenses. Unsent. Daniel read. A minute. 2. Then he looked up. Sori was standing there, waiting, hands at her sides, scars on her fingers in plain sight. I decided to stay. Daniel nodded. The archivist's room on the 2nd floor, 3rd door on the left. Sori stepped over the threshold, and the ground accepted her, quietly, without a hum, without expanding the boundaries, just warmth under her feet, as if the house had spoken. I know. Sori stopped in the middle of the courtyard. She looked down. At her boots. At the ground beneath them. And for the first time during the entire conversation, her face changed. Not a smile. Not tears. Surprise. The pure, childlike surprise of a person standing for the first time on ground that won't cast them out. Daniel closed the gate. Sori turned out to be more valuable than Daniel had anticipated. Not as an archivist, as a source. She knew the Silver Scroll from the inside, not the surface, the mechanics. Who answers to whom? Who hates whom? Where the money is, where the debts are, where the fear is. She spoke for 3 nights in a row. Daniel took notes. Sori sat at the desk in the office and spoke in an even voice, without emotion, like a presenter at a meeting. She was taken from a temple orphanage at the age of 7. The guild bought orphans in bulk, boys for warehouses, girls for training. Sori was taught to read, write, count, and appraise the value of a house in 30 seconds, the value of land in a minute, the value of a person at a glance. By the age of 16, she was working in the fields. By 20, she was the best appraiser in the Eastern Division. By 22, they sent her to Daniel, because the best are sent on the most difficult assignments, scars on her fingers. Daniel asked on the 2nd night. Sori looked at her hands. She was silent. Then she answered, punishment for her first failed appraisal. She was 11. She had overestimated the value of the plot by 3%. Her mentor pressed her fingers against a hot skillet and explained that mistakes are costly. She never made a mistake again. Daniel listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't offer comfort. He took notes. When Sori finished, he asked one question. Workhouse number 3. Who guards it? Sori wasn't surprised. She knew he would ask. 2 guards at the door, 4 inside, shifts every 8 hours. At night, 1 at the door, 2 inside. The head of the house is Go Tae-hoon, a former army sergeant, cruel but dim-witted, follows orders to the letter. If the order doesn't say to kill, he won't kill. If it says to hold, he'll hold until he receives another order. How many people are there? Sori paused. 23, women and girls, embroiderers. The youngest is 13. Daniel squeezed the pencil so hard the wood cracked. Then he unclenched his fingers, put down the pencil, picked up another one. Go on. Sori told him everything. The building's layout, the arrangement of the rooms, where the workers sleep, where the guards are stationed, where the back entrance is, where the windows had no bars. She knew this building because she had assessed it herself 2 years ago. Daniel listened and drew a floor plan. Then he looked at it and saw a prison, an ordinary prison for people the world had written off. In the morning, he called a meeting. 6 people at the table: Kim, Min-soo, Taesong, Hayeon, Sori, and him. Daniel placed the workhouse floor plan and the petition for Yuna's release on the table. The hearing is in 7 days. Judge Nam: cowardly, but not corrupt. I need 2 things at once: legal pressure through the court and a physical presence near the workhouse so they don't have time to transfer Yuna to another location before the decision. Min-soo raised her hand. A physical presence is my job. No, Daniel shook his head. They know you. A former captain of the guard at the doors of the workhouse will attract attention in a minute. Sorry. Everyone looked at her. Sori sat twirling a pencil between her fingers. Her face was calm. I can go back as an appraiser. Say that the guild has requested a re-inventory of the workhouse. I'll forge the document. Go Tae-hoon won't check it. He doesn't check documents. He checks seals. And I have the seal. She pulled a small bronze cylinder from her pocket. The silver scroll seal. An appraiser's personal seal. Daniel looked at the seal, then at Sori. You didn't return it. Sori shrugged. I forgot. Silence. Then Taesong snorted. For the first time in 2 months, the sound was like a laugh. Daniel nodded. The plan was risky. Sori was walking back into the lion's den. If the guild already knew about her betrayal, she wouldn't come out of there alive. Daniel looked at her. Are you sure? Sori looked back at him. I was their tool for 15 years. This will be the last time I use their seal, and the first time I use it for the right cause. They prepared for 4 days, Daniel wrote. Sori prepared the cover documents. Min-soo drew up an escape plan in case of failure. Tae-san sharpened his sword. Ha-yeon packed a bag of medicine for every possible outcome. Kim remained silent and prayed. On the 5th day, Sori left at dawn. Expensive clothes, black gloves. This time, she wore them. Her scars were hidden. Her face was professional. She was once again the guild's appraiser. For 3 hours, Daniel stood at the gate and watched her leave. The ground beneath him hummed ominously. He couldn't protect her outside the compound. He couldn't sense what was happening to her. He could do nothing. Only wait. 3 hours. He paced the courtyard. Miri hid from him because his face frightened her. Kim sat on a bench and didn't move. Hayeon was sorting through the herbs for the 3rd time. Min-soo stood at the gate with a sword. Taesong stood beside her. 2 hours passed. Then 2.5. As the 3rd hour drew to a close, the ground trembled. Not alarm, recognition. Someone familiar was approaching the border. Daniel was at the gate before he realized he was running. He opened it. Sori was standing in the street, unharmed, pale but unharmed, a folder of papers in her hands. Behind her stood another woman. No, not a woman. A girl. Thin, dark hair down to her shoulders, bitten nails, gray work clothes. Her eyes were huge and empty, like those of someone who had forgotten how to believe in anything. A mole under her left eye. Daniel stood and watched. The ground beneath him burst with warmth. Every stone, every blade of grass, every root of every tree in the garden cried out a single word. Hours. Yuna stood in the doorway and looked at the house, at the trees in bloom, at the courtyard where the blacksmith stood frozen with a hammer in his hand, at the windows from which faces peered out, at the man before her, in whose face she both recognized and did not recognize her brother. A different gaze, a different manner, but his hands. She looked at his hands, the same scars on his palms. Sorry, she said quietly. Go Tae-hoon doesn't check the papers. He checks the seals. The seal was genuine. The order to transfer worker number 17 to another facility. He signed it without reading it. Daniel didn't hear. He was looking at Yuna. Yuna was looking at him. "Come in." She didn't move. She stood in the doorway. Her legs wouldn't move. 2 months in the workhouse had taught her that thresholds were traps, that behind every door stood someone who wanted to take something away. Daniel didn't step toward her, didn't reach for her hand, didn't embrace her. He took a folded sheet of paper out of his pocket. He held it out. Yuna took it mechanically, unfolded it. It was a piece of paper, a certificate of joint ownership. Her name was written next to his. So Yuna, co-owner of the So clan estate. Legally, you now own half of it. His voice was even, calm. If you want to kick me out, you have the right. Yuna stared at the paper. The letters swam before her eyes. She read it 3 times. Her name, in black and white, on paper bearing a seal she'd known since childhood. 3 impressions. A turn to the east, the real one. Yuna lifted her face, and she cried, for the first time in 2 months. Not from grief, from the fact that someone had written her name on a document and said, "This is yours." She stepped over the threshold. The land accepted her not as a guest, as the mistress. A rumble ran from the foundation to the roof. The walls shook, the peach trees bent their branches, the well splashed with water, and the boundary of the territory burst outward. Not by meters, by tens of meters. It passed through the alley, through the neighboring house, across the street, 2 blocks away. Daniel staggered from the sensation. Too much, too fast. The earth rejoiced. It had regained the daughter of the clan, the heiress, blood and right in one person. Yuna stood in the courtyard and wept. Miri approached her, took her by the hand, led her into the house. Hyan was already heating water. Kim stood by the door, tears streaming down his wrinkles. He didn't wipe them away. Taesong turned his back to the wall. His shoulders were shaking. Minsu stood upright, as always, but her hand on the sword hilt was clenched until her knuckles turned white. Sori stood by the gate, alone, gloves off. Her scars were visible. She watched it all, the crying girl, the old man with tears, the swordsman by the wall, the house buzzing with joy. And on her face was an expression she herself could not name. Daniel approached her. "Thank you." Sori looked at him. "I stole a person from the silver scroll with a forged order. They'll kill me." Daniel nodded. "Not on this earth." The silver scroll learned of Yuna's disappearance a day later, of Sori's betrayal 2 days later. Master Huan sat in his office and adjusted his glasses 17 times an hour. Daniel knew this because Sori knew Huan's schedule, and because the city knew how to whisper. On the 60th day of Daniel's life in this world, the situation looked like this. The quiet courtyard, 32 residents. The territory covered 4 blocks. The estate. The wing is finished. 10 additional rooms. The smithy is working. The orchard yields 30 peaches a day. The cellar. 4 white oak barrels stand on the shelves. The earth remembered the wine, and 2 weeks ago, Daniel placed his palm on an empty barrel and asked. The barrel filled overnight, dark wine with a hint of cherry and oak. Kim tasted it and went into a corner. He sat there for 10 minutes. Then he came back with red eyes and said the wine was exactly like the one Father Jin Ho used to make. Daniel sold it by the bottle. With the money he earned, he bought paper, ink, and time. Yuna's trial was in 3 days, but the lawsuit was no longer needed in its original form. Yuna was free. However, Daniel did not withdraw the lawsuit. He rewrote it. A new subject, not the release of a specific person, a declaration that the detention of all 23 female workers in house number 3 was illegal. Kim said it was madness. Min-soo said it was suicide. Taesong remained silent and sharpened his sword. Hyeon brought tea and said one sentence. 23 people are 23 expansions of the boundary. Daniel looked at her. Hyeon shrugged. I think so. Daniel smiled, his third smile in 2 months. Yuna.
During her first 3 days at the estate, she hadn't uttered a single word. She sat in the room she'd been assigned, she ate what Miri brought her, she slept 14 hours a day. Haeyeon examined her and told Daniel. Exhaustion. 2 months of malnutrition. Calluses on her fingers down to the bone. A burn on her left wrist. An old one. A week old. Punishment for slow work. Daniel listened, his expression unchanged. But the ground beneath the estate hummed so loudly that the bottles in the cellar rattled. On the 4th day, Yuna went out into the garden. It was a warm morning. She stood under a peach tree and touched the bark. Daniel watched from the window. Yuna placed her palm on the trunk, and the tree bent a branch toward her hand. A peach fell into her palm. Yuna looked at the fruit, then at the tree, then at the house. And for the first time in 4 days, she spoke aloud. He remembers me. Daniel stood by the window and felt the earth singing. On the 6th day, Yuna came to his study.
She sat down silently across from him. She looked at the papers. Then she said, You're not my brother. No. But you saved the house. Yes. And you got me out. Yes. Yuna paused. I want to help. Daniel looked at her. 16 years old, skinny, with a burn on her wrist, with bitten nails, with eyes that still held the darkness of the workhouse. What can you do? Yuna lifted her chin. Embroider. And remember faces. In the workhouse, I memorized every girl's face. 22 faces. I know their names. I know where they were taken from. I know who their families are. Daniel looked at her. Then he took out a blank sheet of paper. He placed it in front of her. A pen. Ink. Write. Yuna wrote for 2 hours. 22 names. 22 addresses. 22 stories. A 13-year-old girl from a dyer's family, taken for her father's debt. A fake debt. A 20-year-old woman from a village to the north, sold by her own uncle. The documents are forged.
A 15-year-old girl, an orphan, taken from an orphanage, like Sori. Daniel read, and each name weighed on his shoulders like a stone. 22 stones. 22 people he had to find. He looked at Yuna. You wrote 22. Hyeon said 23. Who's the 23rd? Yuna. Yuna looked at her hands. Me. Daniel nodded. 23. The day of the trial for the second lawsuit, Daniel walked to court with a folder containing 22 names and a copied lawsuit. Min-soo on the left, Taesong on the right, Sori behind him. She had insisted. If the Silver Scroll saw her in court, they would realize she had finally switched sides. She wanted them to understand. The courtroom. Judge Nam, 45 years old, nervous. His fingers tapped on the table. He knew who was standing before him. He knew whose interests were at stake, and apparently, he had already received a note from Hwan. Daniel stood up. He began to speak. He presented a list of 22 names, each name with a story. With evidence of unlawful detention, fake debts, forged documents, minors without guardian consent. Judge Nam listened. He paled. His fingers tapped faster and faster. Attorney Gill objected. The workhouse operates within the law. Contracts have been signed. Debts have been confirmed. Daniel produced the bookseller's scroll, the land code from the time of the first houses, the article on land rights.
Any detention of a person on the territory without the consent of the land on which the building stands is a violation. The attorney objected. That law was repealed 300 years ago. Daniel replied, "Show me the decree of repeal." Silence. The lawyer shuffled through the papers. He couldn't find it, because there was no decree. 300 years ago, ancestral magic was declared a relic of the past. But formally, no one had repealed the law. It had simply been forgotten, just as the bonds had been forgotten. Judge Nam looked at the scroll, then at Daniel, then at the lawyer.
His fingers stopped tapping. He made his decision. Not the one Juan wanted, and not the one Daniel expected. A compromise. The judge ordered an inspection of the workhouse, a 3-person commission, 10 days for the inspection, a decision after the results are in. Not a victory, but not a defeat either. The door opened slightly. Daniel left the courtroom. A crowd was waiting on the street, larger than last time. 100 people, maybe more. They had heard. 22 names. Each name was someone's daughter, someone's sister, someone's mother. People stood and were silent. But the silence was different, not bewildered, heavy, like a stormy sky before the rain. Daniel walked home and thought about the 10 days. 10 days until the inspection. 10 days during which the silver scroll could move all the workers to another location, destroy the documents, cover their tracks. He had to act. That evening, he sat in his office. Sori was beside him. A map of the city lay on the table. If they were going to move people, it would be at night, through the back alleys, to the river. There was the guild's wharf, a barge to the port, and from the port, anywhere. Daniel stared at the map. 20 blocks remained from the border of his territory to the workhouse. After Yuna's arrival, the border had surged forward, but 20 blocks were still 20 blocks. He couldn't reach it. A knock at the door. Minsu entered. With her was an unfamiliar man. The earth hadn't warned him. The man stood in the hallway, and the earth was silent. Again. Just like back then with the bookseller. Daniel stood up. The man was old. Very old. But he stood straight. His face was thin. His eyes. Those same eyes. A bottomless well. The bookseller. But now without a bag, without books, without a mask. He entered the study, sat down, looked at Daniel, and said, "My name is An Jisoo. 312 years ago, I did the same thing you did. I activated the bonds. I accepted humans. I expanded the territory. And then I got scared and destroyed everything. And I've come to tell you why." Daniel sat down. Sori sat motionless. Kim appeared in the doorway, Taesong behind him, Hyeon, Minsu, Yuna. They all stood and listened. An Jisoo spoke, calmly, quietly, without self-pity. 300 years ago, he was a calligraphy teacher from another world, not a lawyer, not a warrior, a teacher. He ended up in the body of the heir to the An clan and activated the bonds by accident. Just like Daniel, the earth responded. He accepted people, many people, hundreds. The territory grew. The city changed. There were no guilds back then. There were other enemies. There were wars. There were sieges. He held on. 10 years, 20. The territory covered half the city. He was invincible on his own land. And then he realized he couldn't leave. The territory had bound him, not with a rope, not with a chain, with people. Every person he had taken in became his responsibility, forever. If he left, the territory weakened. If the territory weakened, the people were left defenseless. If the people were left unprotected, they would perish. He had become a hostage in his own home. Daniel listened. He was silent. An Jisoo continued. He was exhausted. Over 30 years, the responsibility had crushed him. He couldn't sleep because he felt everyone on his territory. He couldn't eat because he knew who was hungry. He couldn't laugh because he knew who was crying. The land would not let him forget, not for a second. And one night, he crossed the border and did not return. The bonds did not break immediately. They weakened slowly. A month, a year, 10 years. Without its master, the territory shrank. People left. Houses stood empty. 20 years later, nothing remained of his territory, and he wandered the world trying to forget. He couldn't. He returned. He opened a bookstore. He lived quietly. He watched as the silver scroll devoured the city, block by block. And he hated himself every day. Silence. Daniel looked at the old man. The old man looked at Daniel. "You came to stop me." "No, I came to help." Daniel waited. Anjisu placed his palm on the table. "I can't reclaim the bonds. I betrayed them. The earth won't hear me. But I can do something else. I know how to expand the territory without people." Anjisu explained for 3 hours. Daniel listened and took notes. The territory's bonds had a second level. The first level is people. One person, one expanded border. Slowly. Reliable, but slow. The second level is memory. The earth remembers not only those who live on it, it remembers those who lived on it. Everyone who ever called this patch of soil home has left a trace. A name spoken on the earth does not disappear. It sinks deep. And if the master knows the name and speaks it aloud while standing at the border of the territory, the earth will stretch toward the place where that person lived. Not toward the person, toward the place, toward the memory of them in that land. And if that land responds, the boundaries will merge. Not instantly, not forever, but long enough to open a passage, a temporary bridge between two patches of land that remember the same people. Daniel looked at Yuna's list. 22 names, 22 addresses, 22 houses from which these people were taken. If even one of these houses stands on land that remembers its mistress, and if that land is near the workhouse, Daniel turned to Yuna. Which of them lived closest to house number 3? Yuna thought. Min Sola, 15 years old, the dyer's daughter. Their workshop stood across the street from the workhouse. Across the street. One house, one name, one bridge. Daniel looked at Anji Su. It'll work. The old man was silent. If the land beneath the dyer's workshop remembers Min Sola, if she lived there long enough, if her connection to the house was real. Yuna answered before Daniel could ask. Sola was born in that workshop. Her mother died in childbirth. Her father raised her alone. She had been dyeing fabrics since she was 5. Every day. For 10 years. The ground there is steeped in her touch. Daniel stood up. When? Anji Su held his hand. At night. The bridge holds only as long as the master stands at the border and speaks the name. You won't be able to move. You won't be able to defend yourself. If someone attacks while you're holding the bridge, you're defenseless. Minsu stepped forward. That's what I'm here for. Taesong stood beside her. And me. They went out at midnight. Daniel, Minsu, Taesong, and Anji Su. The old man walked slowly but surely. His feet remembered every stone in this city, 300 years of memory in every step. They reached the border of the territory, 4 blocks from the estate, the edge. Beyond lay the land Daniel could not sense, emptiness, darkness, nothing. Daniel stood at the border, facing east, toward the weaver's district, toward the workers' quarters, toward Minsol, whom he had never seen. Minsu stood to his right, sword drawn. Taesong to his left, his sword drawn as well. Anji Su stood behind him. Do it, Daniel closed his eyes. He placed his palm on the ground and spoke the name. Min Sola. Silence. He spoke it again. Min Sola. The dyer's daughter, born in a workshop on Weaver Street. The ground beneath his palm trembled. Far away, very far away, 20 blocks. Something responded, faintly, like a candle on the other side of the river. The ground beneath the dyer's workshop remembered. Daniel clenched his fingers. He dug into the ground. He pulled, not physically, with will, with all the master's will he had accumulated over 2 months. Min Sola, you are not forgotten. Your home remembers you. I remember you. The response grew stronger, brighter, closer. The ground between him and the workshop began to stir, block by block, stone by stone, street by street. Not his territory. No. A bridge. A thin, trembling bridge of memory stretching across 20 blocks of the night city. Daniel could feel it. Fragile. Like a thread. But enough. Across the bridge, he saw, not with his eyes, the earth showed him. A building with barred windows, 2 stories. The night shift. 1 guard at the door. Asleep. 2 inside. Awake. And on the 2nd floor, in a long room with rows of bunks, 22 people. Asleep. No, not all of them. 1 is awake. A 15-year-old girl, sitting on a bunk, staring out the barred window. Min Sola. Daniel was holding the bridge. His hands were shaking. Sweat was running down his face. An Jisoo stood behind him, his hand resting on Daniel's shoulder. Not to help, just to be there. The old man couldn't help, but he could be there. Daniel opened his eyes. The bridge was standing, fragile, but standing. I can see them. Minso turned her head. Everyone was alive. Everyone was in place. They hadn't started the transfer, not yet. He let go. The bridge collapsed instantly. The ground beneath his palm became ordinary, cold, dead. Daniel fell to his knees. Tae-sun caught him. Daniel was breathing heavily. His vision was blurry, but he was smiling. I know where they are. I know how many guards there are. I know the layout of the rooms. That's enough for an inspection. An Jisoo stood there watching him. The old man's face was strange, a mixture of pain and something else, something that could have been hope if the old man remembered what it looked like. They returned to the estate at dawn. Daniel slept for 2 hours. Then he woke up and sat down at the table. The inspection was in 4 days. He had to prepare the commission. Judge Nam appointed 3 inspectors. 1 was chosen by the court. 1 was proposed by the plaintiff. 1 by the defendant. Daniel proposed Heian, a healer, a medical examination of the conditions of detention. The Silver Scroll proposed its own person. Daniel couldn't control that. The 3rd was appointed by the court, an unfamiliar official, neutral, presumably. 4 days of preparation. Daniel drew up detailed instructions for Heian, what to look for, what to document, what questions to ask, living conditions, food, medical care, availability of documents, voluntary status. Heian read the instructions. She looked at Daniel. You're teaching a healer how to conduct an inspection. I'm teaching an inspector how to document violations. There's a difference. Heian smirked. It was the first time he'd seen her smirk. Not smile, smirk. With that ironic turn of the lips that spoke of a person who'd seen too much to be surprised, but not enough to stop being angry. I'll find everything I need. Find it. Inspection day. Heian left in the morning. She returned in the evening, gloomy, silent. She sat in the kitchen, didn't eat, didn't drink, stared at the wall. Daniel sat across from her. He waited. Heian spoke after 10 minutes. Her voice was steady, Too steady, 22 people. Average age, 17. Average weight, 15% below normal. 4 showed signs of beatings. 7 had skin conditions from dyes without protective gear. One 13-year-old girl has a broken wrist. It healed improperly. She received no medical care. She sewed with her broken hand for 3 weeks until the bone healed on its own. Crooked. Heian paused. I documented everything. The report was 12 pages long, with a description of every violation, with names, with diagnoses. The court inspector signed it. The guild inspector refused to sign. His signature isn't needed. 2 out of 3 is enough. Daniel took the report. He read it. Every page, every name, every diagnosis. Then he put it on the table. Then he placed his palm on the table. The wood beneath his hand cracked. A single thin crack across the entire tabletop. The earth reacted to his anger. Daniel removed his hand. He looked at the crack, then at Heian. We'll get them. All 22 of them. Heian nodded. Then she stood up. She went to her room. Through the wall, Daniel could hear her crying. Quietly. Angrily. Like a person who knows how to heal and saw what needed to be healed long ago, but no one came. The inspection report landed on Judge Nam's desk 2 days later. 12 pages, the signatures of 2 inspectors, diagnoses, names, facts. Judge Nam read, and his fingers didn't tap on the table. They lay motionless. When he finished reading the last page, he looked up, and there was no cowardice in his eyes. There was anger, quiet, judicial. The anger of a man who had spent his whole life hiding behind procedures and suddenly saw why those procedures existed. He scheduled a hearing for 3 days later. Daniel was preparing, but the Silver Scroll was preparing as well. On the second day after the petition was filed, a messenger from the court arrived at the estate, an official notice. Master Huan had filed a counterclaim, not regarding property, regarding a charge of witchcraft. The estate's owner, So, was using forbidden magic to illegally expand his territory and influence citizens. The demands? The arrest of the accused, confiscation of property, transfer of the lands to the guild's administration. Daniel read it and placed the paper on the table. So this was their trump card. Kim turned pale. Charges of witchcraft. If the court accepts this for consideration, you'll be arrested. And if they drag you outside the territory... He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Daniel sat at the table. He was thinking. The charge of witchcraft was a strong move. In this world, magic wasn't forbidden as such, but ancestral magic, the bonds of the territory, had been declared a relic 300 years ago. Formally, it wasn't forbidden, but public opinion was against it. Earth magic was the superstition of old men, a dark legacy of the past. The Silver Scroll didn't strike based on the law. It struck based on fear. People feared what they didn't understand. Daniel stood up. He walked over to the wall. He took down the charter. He took down a copy of the first lawsuit. He looked at the empty wall. Then he turned to Sori. I need everything you know about public hearings. Sori raised an eyebrow. You want an open trial. I want the whole city to see what the bonds of the territory are, not through rumors, not through whispers, with their own eyes. Minsu shook her head. It's a risk. If people get scared, you'll lose public opinion. If they see the truth, I'll win more than just the trial. Daniel had been working for 2 days straight. He hadn't slept. Heian brought him food every 4 hours and stood there until he finished eating. He drafted a motion for a public hearing on the witchcraft charges, combining all the cases, the land claims, the lawsuit for the workers' release, and Huan's counterclaim. All in one courtroom, all in front of the public. The logic was simple. The Silver Scroll wanted silence. It wanted closed doors and bribed judges. Daniel was giving them the opposite. Light, the city, hundreds of eyes. The motion was filed with the clerk's office. Judge Chunho reviewed it in a day, approved it. The old man understood what was happening. He saw the scheme, and he wanted the city to see it too. The hearing was scheduled for 5 days later, Libra Square, an open session of the Land Chamber. For the first time in 30 years. 5 days. Daniel used every hour. He prepared a speech, not for the judge, for the city. He wrote 15 pages, then cut it down to 10, then to 7, then to 5. Every word weighed, every fact in place, every name named. He wasn't accusing, he was telling a story, what the bonds of the territory are, how they work, why they were forgotten, and who stood to gain from them being forgotten. Anjisu came every evening, sat in the office, listened, made corrections. The old man knew the 300-year-old history better than any archive. He told Daniel exactly what had happened. He hadn't signed the ban. The decree appeared after he left. It was written by those who saw the empty territory and realized that land without an owner is land that can be taken. The first Silver Scroll, the first land grab, the first eviction. Anjisu spoke and his voice trembled. 300 years of guilt. Every word cost him like a blow. Daniel listened and transcribed his speech. Not the old man's guilt. Facts. Only facts. On the 4th day before the hearing, something happened that Daniel hadn't expected. There was a knock at the gate. The land had sent word. A woman, young, of noble birth. Her clothes were expensive but worn, something heavy under her cloak, metallic, round. Daniel opened the door. Standing on the threshold was a girl of about 19, quiet, with a book under her arm, dark eyes, a calm face, too calm for her age. The face of someone who has shut off all emotion and lives by calculation. Under her cloak, she was hiding a family seal. Daniel saw it through the bonds. Bronze. An old one. With the coat of arms he'd seen in the documents. The Yoon clan. The first family destroyed by the Silver Scroll. "My name is Yoon Hana." Daniel nodded. "I know who you are." Hana entered. She was carrying a folder of papers. The Yoon clan's documents. Hidden. Preserved. She had carried them under her cloak for a year. She had waited a year. She sat down at the table and placed the folder in front of Daniel. "I heard you're filing claims. I want to file mine." Daniel opened the folder. The Yoon clan's documents. The family charter, the land registry, deeds, and among them, the thing that made him freeze. Correspondence between Master Huan and the notary. 4 letters in which Huan explicitly orders the preparation of a forged deed for the Yoon clan's lands, with names, with dates, with bribe amounts. Daniel looked up. "Where did you get this?" Hannah looked at him, calmly, coldly. "The notary was a friend of my father's. Before he died, he gave me copies." Daniel looked at the letters, then at Hannah, then at the letters again. This isn't just proof of a single forged deed. It's proof of a system. A conspiracy. Organized fraud. With these letters, it was possible not just to return the land to the Yoon clan. With them, it was possible to bury the Silver Scroll entirely. "I found 3 procedural violations in your documents. We can file a lawsuit. If you sign as the heiress." Hannah looked at him, and for the first time in a year, something cracked in her icy composure. Not a smile, not tears. A tremor in her chin. 1 second, they stopped pitying her. They started working with her. She signed. Daniel scheduled the Yun clan's lawsuit for tomorrow's hearing, the 20th, and attached Juan's letters. The day of the hearing, Libra Square, early morning. Daniel stood at the estate gates. Behind him stood the entire silent courtyard. 35 people. Everyone. Kim with a staff, Miri holding his hand, Taesong with a sword, Hyeon with a bag, Minsu in front, straight as a ruler, Sori in a black cloak, gloves off, scars on display. Yuna next to Daniel, quiet, with a burn on her wrist, with eyes that were no longer empty. Hana with a folder under her arm, the Yun clan seal in her pocket. And behind them, 30 people. The blacksmith and his family, the old woman from the tea shop, refugees, orphans, those who had nowhere to go until this house appeared. They walked through the city, 35 people, in silence. People on the streets stopped and watched. Libra Square was large, stone pavement, a fountain in the center, the courthouse on the north side. When they arrived, the square was already full. 200 people, 300, 400. The city had come to watch. Judge Chun Ho sat at a table on the platform. Judge Nam beside him. Both of them. A joint hearing. Opposite them, Master H. Juan, the guild's attorney. 4 assistants. Juan sat upright, glasses adjusted, briefcase on his lap, a smile in place, but his eyes behind the lenses darted across the crowd. He hadn't expected so many people. Daniel sat down at the plaintiff's table. He laid out the papers. He looked out at the square, at the faces, at the eyes. 400 people were looking at him and waiting. Judge Chun Ho raised his hand. Silence. "The floor is yours, plaintiff." Daniel stood up. The square was silent. 400 people, the judges, Kwang, the sky, the stone beneath his feet. He placed his palm on the table. The wood was warm. Even here, far from the estate across the entire city, he felt an echo. The earth of the square, ancient, remembering thousands of verdicts, thousands of names. He began to speak, not loudly, evenly, as one tells a story that must be heard. 300 years ago, the land of Hedon was alive. Every patch of soil remembered its master, remembered the blood spilled for it, remembered the oaths sworn upon it. This bond was called the Bonds of the Territory, and it meant one thing. Land is not a thing. Land is memory, and memory has rights. He spoke, and the square listened. He told how the bonds worked, how the eldest sons would place their palms on the foundation and the house would respond, how the wells provided clean water, how the walls kept out enemies, how the gardens bloomed because the earth remembered its trees. He told how the Uzi had been forgotten, not banned, forgotten, because it was in someone's interest for people to stop hearing their land. Because land that is silent can be bought, sold, taken away. He spoke for 7 minutes. Then he stopped. He looked at Juan. "Master Juan accuses me of witchcraft, of using forbidden magic. I will answer that charge. But first, let me ask one question." He turned toward the square. "Who among you has lost a home?" Silence. Then a single hand went up in the crowd. Then another. Then 10. Then 30. Then Daniel stopped counting. More than half the square stood with their hands raised. Daniel turned to the judges. "Here are my witnesses." He took out some papers. 20 lawsuits regarding the So clan's lands. A lawsuit for the release of the female workers. A 12-page inspection report. A lawsuit from the Yu clan. And 4 letters. Juan's correspondence with the notary. He read the letters aloud, unhurriedly, every word. The courtroom listened. Juan sat motionless. His hand reached for his glasses and froze halfway there. The guild's lawyer turned pale. The letters contained names, dates, amounts, direct instructions to prepare forged documents. "This isn't sorcery." Daniel's voice was steady. "These are papers, facts, evidence. Witchcraft is what the Silver Scroll did. It turned lies into law. It turned forged papers into seized homes. It turned living people into slaves at the looms. That is real witchcraft. And it requires no magic, only greed and impunity." He fell silent. The square was silent. Then Judge Jung-ho spoke. The floor was given to the defendant. The guild's attorney stood up. He began to speak, and Daniel could hear his voice trembling. He referred to procedures, to deadlines, to formalities. He didn't mention the letters. He couldn't. 4 sheets lay on the judge's desk, and every line in them was a verdict. Juan sat motionless. His smile vanished completely. His face turned gray. The eyes behind his glasses were glassy. He knew. From the moment Daniel read the first letter, he knew he had lost. The case. Everything. Jung-ho listened to the lawyer for 3 minutes. Then he raised his hand. "Enough." He looked at Judge Nam. Nam nodded. For the first time in his career, he nodded without hesitation. 2 judges, 1 decision. Chon-ho spoke for 5 minutes, briefly, dryly, like a man who had waited 40 years for this moment. "The deeds to all the So clan's land parcels are declared invalid. Ownership rights are fully restored. The deed to the Yoon clan's lands is declared invalid. Ownership rights are restored. Workhouse number 3 is closed. All persons held there are to be released immediately. The charge of witchcraft is dismissed due to lack of evidence. The bonds of the territory do not constitute forbidden magic due to the absence of a law prohibiting them. Magistrate Juan's correspondence has been forwarded to the criminal chamber to initiate a case regarding the systematic falsification documents." Every word fell on the square like a stone in water. Ripples spread out. People listened. They didn't believe it. Then they began to believe. Then someone exhaled. Then someone sniffled. Then the square buzzed, quietly, then louder. Daniel stood and listened to the verdict, the paper in his hands, ordinary paper, with ink and a seal, which weighed more than all the swords in this city. Juan stood up, adjusted his glasses, for the last time. He turned toward the exit, and stopped, because the crowd stood around him, 400 people, and not a single one moved aside. Juan stood and looked at the wall of faces, of the people he had been evicting for years, who were found in the gutters in the morning, who had been driven from their land with forged documents. They stood and looked at him, silently. Min-soo stepped forward, the former captain of the guard, back straight, the badge she had worn for 6 years and which had been taken from her. "Magistrate Juan, in the name of the criminal court, you are under arrest pending investigation." She did not smile. She did not gloat. She was doing what she should have done 6 years ago. Juan was led away. The square buzzed. Daniel stood and looked around, at the faces, at the hands reaching out to him, at the voices shouting his name. He didn't hear them. He looked into the crowd, to its far edge, where, by the wall of a house, stood an old man with shoulder-length gray hair. An Ji-soo stood and looked at Daniel, and for the first time in 300 years, he smiled. He didn't hide it. He didn't hold it back. Openly, like a man who saw that his mistake hadn't been the end, that someone had come and done what he couldn't. Their eyes met across the square, across the crowd, across 300 years. Daniel nodded. An Ji-soo nodded back. Evening. The The quiet courtyard. Daniel stood in the courtyard and counted the plates. 40. No. 45. No. He'd lost count. There were more people now. 22 girls from the workhouse had come to the estate because they had nowhere else to go. For now. Daniel placed a plate in front of each one by one, silently. No speeches, no promises, just a plate and a place. Hyeon brought out 2 huge pots of noodles. Yuna poured tea. Her hands no longer trembled. Minsu sat to Daniel's right, silently, as always. Sori to his left, gloves off, forever. Hannah took the family seal out of her pocket and placed it on the table. Open, for the first time in a year. Miri ran between the tables, helping to pass out the bowls. Blacksmith Doksu stoked the fire in the brazier. Taesong sat at the edge of the table and ate with his left hand because his right lay on the hilt, out of habit. Kim sat on his bench and didn't cry, for the first time in a long time. An Ji-soo sat in the far corner, quiet, small, with a cup in his hands. He was drinking wine from the cellar, dark, with a hint of cherry and oak, and tears were streaming down his face, but he didn't wipe them away. At the far end of the table, Min Sola, the dyer's 15-year-old daughter, was eating noodles and looking at the peach trees. She didn't know that the man at the head table had stretched a bridge 20 blocks across from the Earth's memory to see her. She was just eating, for the first time in a long while, her fill. Sitting next to her was Emily White, a redhead with freckles, holding a torn map folded on her lap. She had arrived 2 days ago, frozen, lost. Daniel met her at the edge of the territory, brought her inside, unfolded her map on the table. He asked, "Show us where your home is. We'll find a way to get you back." Emily looked at the map, then at him, then at the yard with the blossoming trees, and she answered quietly, "Maybe not right now." Now she was sitting at the table, sketching the scene, with quick strokes. A long table in the yard, a canopy, plates, faces, peach trees, the sky. She drew and smiled. Daniel looked at the table, at the people, at the food, at the house. Then he raised his cup. The wine was dark and warm. From the cellar, he remembered, from the barrels filled with earth. He raised the cup and said one sentence, "We're home." Silence for a second. Then Miri raised her cup of tea. Then Yuna. Then Kim. Then Taesun. Then Hyeon and Minso and Sori and Hana and the blacksmith and the old woman from the tea house and the 22 girls from the workhouse and Emily with a pencil in one hand and a cup in the other and An Ji-soo. The old man raised his cup last. His hand was trembling. But he held the cup. He held it. And the earth beneath their feet answered, quietly, barely audible. A deep rumble that came from beneath the foundation, from beneath the stones, from beneath the roots, from the depths where the earth held the memory of everyone who had ever called this place home. The earth answered with a single word, yes. Daniel sat at the table and drank wine. Around him was a home, not walls, people. Ahead lay a long road, appeals, new enemies, the capital, the royal council, the law of ancestral lands, the one behind the silver scroll, the one who, 300 years ago, helped forget the bonds. Daniel knew that years of work lay ahead. But today the table was full, the plates were set, the noodles were hot, and the house stood. An Ji-soo finished his wine. He set down his cup. He looked at Daniel across the table and spoke quietly so that only Daniel could hear. The land did not choose you by chance. Daniel looked at him. I know. It searched for 300 years, among all the worlds. A man who knows how to think of the earth as belonging to those who have rights? a land surveyor from Seoul, who spent 10 years fighting for other people's plots, who knew that land isn't just a line in a registry, it's someone's home. Daniel set down his cup. Peach trees rustled overhead. Petals fell onto the table, onto plates, onto people's shoulders, white and pink. Miri caught them in her palms. Yuna laughed softly, for the first time. Hyeon looked at Daniel across the table, and in her eyes was an expression he had seen only once in his life. In Seoul, in the courthouse hallway, when a widow clutched the ruling to her chest, unable to believe the house had been returned. But now that expression was directed not a piece of paper. Daniel finished his wine. The ground beneath his feet hummed, quietly, steadily, like a heartbeat. He's staying.